Good evening and welcome to the Greenfield Public Schools School Committee meeting for Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. This meeting is being recorded by GCTV. If any other persons present are doing the same, you must notify the chairperson at this time. Not seeing any. Secretary Geneve, would you call the roll?
Sure. All right. Secretary Geneve, I'm here. Vice Chair Martini?
Here.
Chair Johnson-Musad?
Here.
Mayor DeSorger? Okay. Member Goodwin?
Here.
Member Sexton?
Here.
Member Childs?
Here.
All right. We are all here, and other than Mayor DeSorger, and we have a quorum.
Great. Call the meeting to order at 6 p.m. For public comment, we'll start with people who are in the room, if there is any public comment. Okay. Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to make public comment? Not seeing any. We can move on to the report of student reps to the committee.
I do feel like this is record time, like start of meeting to me doing this. This feels weird. Okay, so without further ado then, beginning with Student Council. In the last month, the Student Council partnered with the local Boy Scouts for their annual Scouting for Food initiative. This year, we more than doubled the amount of food collected in the prior year. In total, we collected 4,700 pounds of food, which equates to just under 4,000 meals. This filled 85 crates and 7 bins, and to put that into perspective, last year we collected 2,100 pounds of food, so again, more than doubled. Thank you to everybody who helped our community, who generously donated. We ended the month with our traditional Spirit Week events. It was great to see the staff and students who dressed up on each theme day. They included Celebrity Day, Throwback Thursday, Country vs. Country Club, Senior Dress Up, everyone else dressed in pajamas, teachers dressed as students, and students dressed as teachers, and of course, Class Color Day. There was fierce competition during Penny Wars, and all of the money that we raised this year will be used to support the NHS Adopt a Family. Spirit Week ended with our Thanksgiving pep rally, and the lip sync theme that we had for this year was Decades. This pep rally was full of surprises and helped the students create positive memories and foster a sense of belonging. The lip sync results were 4th place for sophomores, 3rd place for 9th grade, 2nd place for the juniors, and the seniors took 1st place this year. Looking ahead, for the first time ever, we are inviting the entire community to help raise money and awareness about the power of inclusion with Special Olympics. Every year, the Student Council participates in the Polar Plunge in March at the Cape. While we will still do this year, we are also inviting you to plunge in a mobile tank at GHS on Thursday, January 30th. It will be open to the community from 2:30 to 3:30. We will send out more info soon. In the meantime, start spreading the word, forming teams, and prepping costumes. Registration is now open. Members also helped out at Jingle Fest this past weekend, and they dressed up in costumes and helped the GBA promote the events downtown. A little plug for Project 351 and our ambassador. Project 351 is a transformative leadership development program that cultivates a new generation of change makers, civic leaders, and social entrepreneurs. By the effort and example, 351 leaders forge strategies and solutions that build a more just, inclusive, and equitable world. We want to congratulate 8th grader Janessa Fuentes for being selected as the 8th grade GHS Project 351 ambassador. Well done, Janessa. Key Club helped pass out gifts at the Salvation Army dinner, and tomorrow they will be heading to AEL to reach out and teach cooperative games to children. Winter sports now are hot and heavy at the moment. Get out and go support the Green Wave Nation. You can go to arbiterlive.com to find schedules for your favorite teams. And we're very proud of our many teams who headed into the postseason in this last fall sports season and did a great job to wrap up the fall season. Spanish Club had a fun time learning about and celebrating Dia de los Muertos this year with breakfast and face painting. They also worked on a dance for the Thanksgiving pep rally, but unfortunately there was too much planned and they had to put it on until the December pep rally, which will be in just a couple weeks. They're also preparing for an ice skating outing and a Spanish cooking night, and they are hopeful about plans for their next trip to Spain for 2026. For NHS, earlier in November, the NHS officers traveled to Holy Cross University to attend the Massachusetts NHS Leadership Conference. Our officers enjoyed workshops about leadership, student mental health, environmental projects, and much more. They came back with ideas to share with our members to enhance our program and better leaders. NHS has been busy preparing for our Adopt a Family project. We sold wreaths and holiday dip mixes to raise money for this project. We are currently bringing in food donations and using the funds raised to buy gifts for these families in need. The culmination of the project comes at the end of comes at the end of December when we go to the church to help with the heavy lifting needed for this endeavor. On the first day, people who have adopted families bring in their donations, and we will help carry, organize, and keep track of donations. We will also distribute food donations and organize the free clothing store. On Friday, the adopted families will help come to the church to get their holiday presents and food. On this day, we will help carry everything out and help with cleaning up. This is an amazing opportunity to be a part of a great organization that helps others, and this will be the 15th year that the NHS has participated in this event. In terms of drama club, the cast is set for the somewhat true tale of Robin Hood, and the first table read will happen, or did happen, on December 3rd with the entirety of the cast. They are excited about the talent and potential of this production. Rehearsals will be happening multiple afternoons a week, leading up to Tech Week and performance in the first weekend of April. If you have any questions at all, please contact Madame Hartman, Ms. Potee, or Ms. Lax. In the library, this month on Green Wave Reads, they spoke with Kenneth, an 8th grader and member of the Student Council and Library Club. Kenneth is currently reading Blooming Into You, volumes 1 through 3. Quote, this series follows 2 female high school students, Yu Koito and Tuoko Nanami, which I probably mispronounced, so my apologies, and the relationship that develops between them as they learn more about themselves through their experiences together. Kenneth explains that this series pertains to his interests as it is a manga, his favorite genre book. He especially enjoys the manga Insomniacs after school. He says, I can relate to it. The kids have insomnia, and I can barely sleep on my own. Kenneth discovered reading when his friend recommended graphic novels because he noticed Kenneth enjoyed picture books. He picked up his first manga in middle school, reading books like Delicious in Dungeon. He likes to call these silly books goofy manga. While Kenneth loves words and pictures on paper, he can appreciate a good manga to movie. His favorite movie adaptation is Komi Can't Communicate. It's kind of like the first day of school. Everything is new and it becomes difficult to communicate. The characters struggle to communicate. Lastly, Kenneth told us that he enjoys reading in the GHS library's long booth chairs. However, if he isn't in school, he reads during the nighttime with the comfort of the dark. Kenneth hopes to continue to read great manga and someday read the whole series of Insomniacs after school. Wishing congratulations to the GHS band for their wonderful evening of entertainment at the winter concert on Thursday, December 5th. And concluding with the Students of Color Club, the students are currently presenting their lesson plan in December to 8th graders during their advisories on how to effectively address slurs or racialized language in school. They will continue this important work through January with 8th graders and move on to the middle school in February. If you are interested in joining this club, students can contact either Devon Brown or Nate Woodard or Ms. Potee and Ms. Page. That concludes what I've written here, but I can gladly answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Have a nice day.
I had someone join on Zoom who would like to make public comments, so we'll go back to public comment. You have 2 minutes, Doug.
2 minutes, golly. So Doug Selwyn, Greenfield. Good evening to all. Given that ballot question 2 has passed, that means that high stakes testing will not be happening in the state. So I have 3 requests related to that, related to the district. Number 1 is to carefully monitor what's happening at DESE in the legislature because they're already trying to figure out how to get around the will of the people. So I hope that the school committee and administration will be hooking up with other districts and those interested to make sure that the will of the people is not ignored. Secondly, I hope that there is, as the district thinks about what are we going to do, that we don't turn to another one-size-fits-all assessment approach, which could include simply mass core, but instead to take this as an opportunity to think carefully about what we really want for our students and what kind of assessment setup we want to develop that will really support our kids to be the sort of creative and caring and critical and growing adults that we hope they will become. So it's ballot question 2 being passed is just step 1. And now what do we want? It's an opportunity that I hope we take full advantage of. So that's it. Have good holidays all, and thanks for your work.
Thank you, Doug. Before we move on to the reports of the administration, I'd like to take a motion. Not sure why that's happening. A motion to move the consent agenda item B, vote to approve Greenfield High School Spain trip 2026, to next on the agenda and remove it from the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Let's move on to that. Tara?
Okay, thank you. Now I hear myself. Hi, I am Tara Cloutier. I am here to talk to you about my hope for my next trip to Spain with students in 2026. This should be my 13th trip in 24 years to Spain. I've taken 3 to Puerto Rico with groups, almost all from Greenfield High School, one from Smith Academy a really long time ago. I just want to start by saying I appreciate being here myself. That hasn't been the plan for the last few years, and so thank you for having me. You should have the information, I believe, from passports. We're looking to start early this year to save money for our students and hopefully have more time for fundraising to include more students. One thing that was awesome in the trip that I took last year is that the GFA funded a scholarship for the first time, and it seems like that might be the way that's happening to keep including more children in this exciting opportunity. And you have the information. I don't know how much you want me to talk about, or do you have any questions for me?
Any questions for Tara? Thanks for taking the initiative and for doing it all these years. Guess we could hear a motion to vote to approve the,
I move that we
approve the
Approve
Greenfield High
the-
School Spain trip 2026
There you go.
as presented.
Seconded.
Great. And any other discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
All right. Thank you. Okay, we're back to the order. So let's see if Andy is here. We might have to change the order a little bit. Andy's not here. He's running a little bit late. He had a family conflict. So we'll move on to the presentation from the, where's the? Director of Pupil Services, Dave Messing, update. Thank you, Dave.
Good evening, folks.
Good evening. Welcome.
And just to make sure I can share this for the folks tuning in.
Great.
All right, so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. Again, I think there's a lot of interesting conversations related to what's going on in pupil services, and certainly as it relates to what's going on in the rest of the district. In terms of effective use of our time tonight, I thought a way to start would be just some department vitals and really set the stage for some conversations both this evening and then into the future. I think a couple of things that are likely of interest to both this body and folks at large, and are certainly directly relevant to our decision-making and our planning in terms of the lived experience in schools. Has to do with both enrollment numbers, what that means for trends over years past, and then where that brings us, at this point this year and at this point of the year. But then getting into some of the work in terms of how students with disabilities are currently placed. Specifically, that has to do with how much of their day is spent within the general ed environment, which is generally thought of as the least restrictive placement, and some of the work around that that's being done. On the other end of that, it's the trends in terms of the number of students that are supported in out-of-district placements, which is to say students for whom our continuum of services isn't necessarily having the capacity to meet needs, which is not unexpected. And also, lest we forget, the breadth of some of the work that the People Services Office does, touching base on where things stand for English language learning, on a multilingual program, as well as some other selected populations, specifically, homeless or underhoused students, as well as some of the related impacts. So, in terms of that, and all of these are a snapshot, I think it's instructive to think about prevalence of disability. Specifically, there's a lot of things that can help us tap into, specifically what is happening in terms of both enrollment, in terms of either prevalence of specific types of disability. Are there practices related to our identification, either over or under identification of students with particular profiles? And more to the point, what does that mean for the impact on students' learning? So it's not just about students that are presenting with one or more qualifying disabilities, it's about the degree to which those disabilities are educationally significant. And what I mean by that is, one of the things that we can dig down deep enough to and have some nuanced conversation about is the way in which our current instructional program and some of the related supports are more effective or less effective at supporting students with particular learning differences.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Messing. I wonder, are you muted on your computer?
Indeed.
Oh, you are? Okay, just
Indeed,
checking.
both the microphone but also the output.
Okay, great, thank
What
you.
I can do, is this the sole source of input, or is it picking up on all of these as well? Are they any good?
Walk a little closer to the mic and it'll be a bit louder.
So does that. I'm just thinking about where that echo's coming from. How's that? Well, all right. Sorry about that. So in terms of, to get to the point, when we talk about rates, it's not just about number of students enrolling, although it is important for us to know. So when we think about the 328 folks, we're starting to get close to the number of total IEPs that were in district back in like FY21, right? So the 2021 school year. What is important to note there is overall enrollment was much higher at that time, right? So, we think of a lot of reasons for that, and certainly the comparison that we want to make, even as we're careful about that comparison, is against state average. And what I mean by that is any discussion about over-identification of students or something related to the work we're doing in Greenfield Public Schools or the demographics of our students and their needs in terms of being identified for special education as compared to state average. We also need to be thoughtful about that state average is a little bit of an arbitrary number, right? Because across the state, there's some contextual differences that are very, very different. So for our purpose here in town, the fact that we are slightly above state average should be of note to us and should be a sort of cause for us to be thinking about why that could be and in what ways the work that's being done, not only in terms of last year and up until this point, but this year and into the future is helping to address that, right? Because there's a variety of factors that go into disability identification and that prevalence. And it's not to say that just because we are above state average that there's nothing wrong, but it should be an indicator that we're keeping tabs of and having conversations about, if that's fair. So certainly those trend lines are important, both in the global piece, but then also as they relate, to particular clusters of students, where those students are, grade level bands and that sort. Well beyond tonight's conversation, but something that I'd like the school maybe thinking about, especially as we talk about the work, right, and how it informs the instructional program, especially with the alignment between the work that's being done in our instructional programs from the district perspective that has been underway in the last couple of years, and how that's directly tied to the work of the special education, certainly, as well as some of our other diverse subgroups of learners. Similarly, when we think about the uptick in Section 504, the reason this isn't compared to other parts of the state in the way that you'll see our special ed numbers are, as we don't have as straightforward access to those. But again, we see this slow rise in percentage, right? And why is that, right? We would expect for a variety of reasons. There might be better identification of disability. There might be more streamlined identification, which is to say, is it that we're over-identifying folks, or is it that students who may, for one or another reason, not have been identified appropriately previously, are now being identified? What the take-home message is at the end of the day, for our purposes tonight, is there's an increasing number of students for whom their presentation in the school environment is slightly different in some way and requires consideration. That becomes really important for us when we talk about ensuring that more and more of our classrooms are able to support a wider group of learners, right? Because if the more of our environments that are supporting more students, a rising tide raises all ships, if you will. So for me, these are the types of comparisons that I find super instructive. And one of the things that the Department of Ed has done at the state level to support districts is help make it easier to draw some comparisons. Again, we always have to be cautious about any comparisons we make. Each district is very different. All of our buildings in this district are different, so I want to be careful about drawing more generalizations with Athol, just because they happen to be out our way as well, and certainly as we get to other parts of the state. What we do care about is size, right? Because some of the groupings are similar, some of the scale is similar, some of the systems and structures look either similar enough for us to draw some lessons or make some decisions. The reason I thought this was really instructive is it's helpful to see that we are not all that far out of whack in terms of our disability prevalence rate, in terms of end of last year. You'll see, so unlike the numbers I just shared with you that are as of October of this year, this is essentially last year because we have reports from all of these other comparison districts. So we are over state average, so keep in mind state average for this year, essentially last year, the 2023-2024 school year, was about 20% statewide, just over. And currently we're at 23%. Some of the other districts in our comparison districts, are as high as 25%, to give you a sense. So we're not all that far out of line with districts of a similar size, some of whom are in our area, navigating a lot of the same challenges, both as organization, but also supporting some of the same type of student demographics that we are. And again, this is helpful because it helps us have conversations around comparisons in one way or another to some of these other districts as we are thinking about how we're doing in our class. Similarly, another thing that's helpful to think about is how it breaks down. So we look at, of all the students in Greenfield that are identified for special education, what we think of as the primary disability category. This is something that is increasingly going to go away with the new IEP format that was rolled out this year. A lot of times we're sitting around a table with students who may be navigating multiple disabilities, and there's some conversation about which is the primary, right? Which is having the most impact. At present, there's a current one single primary disability identified, as well as sometimes secondary and tertiary disabilities. So when we look, these numbers start to speak for themselves. And like all of the data points in tonight's conversation, these snapshots, it's helpful only in that it gives us an opportunity to have some real interesting conversations about it, right? Specifically autism, right? There's this, by far, we see, we're gonna see high communication impairments because of the number of young children coming in who are receiving speech, either through EI or not. Those are gonna tend to fade the longer kids are in school and get speech and language therapy, especially with the speech and language therapy that we're fortunate to have in district. But when we talk about the autism numbers, we say, why is that? Okay, and of course, much beyond the scope of tonight's conversation, but something to be thoughtful about is, how is it that this number of students is being identified with spectrum disorders? And more to the point, is there something that even for students who may have an identified autism spectrum disorder that we are doing or not doing or could do more of or adjust in a certain way to render the impact of that spectrum disorder for that individual less educationally significant, which is to say, ensure they're still making educational progress, they're still making gains, having a productive experience in our schools every day. So that's the type of thing that I hope we're thinking about when we're talking about this group, decision-making, when we're getting into budget planning, when we're thinking about budget priorities, when we think about the connection between and integration of the work that's being done in the instructional program as a whole, and then the particular ways in which some of our students are impacted to a greater or lesser degree. That's the type of thing that I hope people are thinking about when they're looking at these numbers. The tragic piece about the number of emotional impairments here, we talk about some of the students that come to us for different reasons, who may be, in different places. And certainly when we think about the number of students that enroll in Greenfield, whether it be for the emergency residents in town or some of the other things. And what you'll see is there's a pretty even spread throughout the rest. So of all the 13 disability categories, there's a pretty even spread. Most of them, I've referenced the high number of communication impairments that we see, especially with young children. Developmental delay, some of you may know, is up until 8, for students for whom there isn't another identified disability. So when we look at this, and again, I hope that this isn't the end of this conversation, I hope that this is the beginning, and certainly creates opportunities for us to talk about how we can make decisions and support the work to impact students in a positive way. I hope that folks are thinking about this and trying to ask some question about what does that mean for us, even though some of the factors may impact kids similarly and some may be a little bit different. I imagine, my time's running short. I don't mean to take up all the air in the room. But one of the things that I want to drive home is how students in our district are supported across the spectrum of what we call least restrictive environment. And the way you'll see these numbers, when we talk about full inclusion, that's a student who is in the general ed classroom about 80% of the day or more, right? There are students that might come out for speech, as we've identified, or physical therapy, occupational therapy, or specialized instruction from a special educator, for example, or a counselor. For students for whom that is a small part of their day, we consider them full inclusion. Their day is not considered to be meaningfully impacted by the amount of services they're receiving. When we start talking about students that are out of the general ed classroom more than 21%, specifically that's 21 to 60%, and you can do the math, in a 6.5 hour day, the number of minutes that represents. But for students that's more than a fifth of their day, right? So now we're talking about an hour plus. So maybe they're getting reading and writing. Maybe they're getting reading, writing, and math. Maybe they're getting speech, OT, PT, and counseling. Right now those numbers start to add up. Those students are going to be identified in our partial inclusion. Okay? Why is that important for us? Why should that be something that you folks should care about, the stakeholders watching should care about? Because it tells us a couple of things. One, some subset of those students absolutely need that level of support, right? So the increased time out of the general education environment to some degree should be thought of as increased intensity of service, right? Any time we're not providing a service in the general ed classroom, there should be a good reason for it, right? So that these supports can't be satisfactorily provided in the general ed setting or would be inappropriate to do so, right? In the case of a speech session in some cases or a confidential counseling session, of course. But then also we should be thinking about, are there some of these students that the services could, with a little bit of lead time, some thoughtfulness and configuration as the work continues over this year and into the future, we can increase the amount of these services that are provided effectively in the general ed setting. That becomes most strikingly clear when we're talking about the number of our students that are currently supported the bulk of their day in substantially separate settings. And what I mean by that is, these students that are considered substantially separately placed are out of the general ed environment 60% of the day or more. And in a lot of cases, that's absolutely appropriate, right? These might be students that are receiving discrete trial training for a majority of the day. They might be students for whom a large group, even of 12 or 15 kids, is wildly overstimulating, right? The expectations in an environment of that sort render it really incompatible with learning or being available for learning. So we don't want to be worried or concerned about students receiving that intensity of support, and we want to celebrate the students that we're able to support effectively in our community schools. There is a direct connection between the number of students that we are supporting in our substantially separate programs and students who would otherwise have to be supported out of district, which in and of itself is further away from what we're trying to do. At the same time, we need to be very sober about our approach to making sure that we're not just shifting students from these more intensive settings into the general ed setting for the sake of doing so, right? For example, the audit of our programs, which has since been called tiered focus monitoring and is now continued, monitoring improvement, identified that 20% of our students with disabilities are supported in substantially separate programs, as compared to the state average of something like 13%. So even as we are skeptical of state averages, right, because they don't do a great job, Mark Twain said, there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics, right? So we want to be very skeptical about those averages and what they mean. At the same time, we want to understand that those differences mean something. We are supporting more kids in more restrictive environments than we probably should. That's the type of thing we could say when compared to state average. As a result of that, the work that we're doing is to increase our ability to support kids effectively in less restrictive environments. And that becomes really important when we're talking about budget conversations, when we're talking about instructional planning conversations, when we're talking about policy conversations, because it isn't just about moving a student into a gen ed classroom, it's about what is happening in that gen ed classroom, what supports are available, what does the experience look like as we roll out high quality instructional curriculum and materials, as we spend a lot of time focusing on like high leverage practices that support all students. And then we talk about the ways we keep tabs on kids over time, the way we identify things early. We talk about implementing some of the recent learning over the last several years in reading instruction at the early levels. Those types of things are very important for us because then we're able to get out ahead of it and make sure that we have the infrastructure, and by that I mean the decision-making capacity, the identification, and the tools to put interventions in place in a timely way so that students can have experiences that are productive and positive, even if they may be navigating some disability challenges, for example, or in the case of multilingual learners, cultural or linguistic challenges, that with some configuration, hard work, and getting some traction, we can minimize the negative impact on their progress. And that really is the most important thing in our work when we talk about special education, when we talk about English as a second language instruction, in working to ensure that students don't need those services by the time they're graduating. So I had some concern about including the early education programming numbers here because it's nuanced. I know that I'm short for time, and I'm not great at being brief. So thinking about it is absolutely critical to ensure that students at this age, some of whom have never set foot in a group structured educational setting before, have access to their peers, right? It is super important that we're able to provide students exposure at this age. You're talking about kids that are coming to us at 3, some of whom we might have the benefit of having for a couple of years in our preschool, access to age level peers. And yet, in some cases, whether it's disability related or not, we have students that are in those settings that need tremendous support. So I was skeptical of sharing these numbers because of how they might be interpreted without the ability to talk about them. But one of the things that we need to ensure that we do is still have opportunities to support students in highly intensive settings in our preschool, while also ensuring that everything we're doing is intended to support all kids in an integrated fashion. And that's a really interesting conversation for us to have, certainly at another time. Similar in philosophy to our K through 12 programming, but in some ways unique because of that age level and students coming to us turning 3. This is what I was getting at before, so I won't dwell on it. It really has to do with a couple of the areas in our current progress reporting to the state, right? So of all of the ways the state looks at our work as a district, there are several special ed criterion. The 2 that are related, one is, they just call it right out, least restricted environment. How many of your students are you educating in the general ed environment? That is the most basic version of that conversation. And again, I hope that folks will understand there's a direct connection between our ability to support the average general educator in being able to create and maintain a classroom environment at any grade level that can meet the needs of a diverse group of learners. You know, it's reasonable to say that these classrooms are more diverse in their needs than ever before, and we know more about how to teach at a high level in some of these high level practices that are happening. So similarly, when we talk about 34, this continuum of services, it's just what is the array of services offered by the district, whether that be related services, you know, a teacher of the visually impaired, you know, teachers of the deaf, our counselors, our speech pathologists, for example, or when we're thinking about special educators, the different types of specialized instruction that they provide. So continuing to both, you know, ensure that those are codified effectively, that everybody's clear, and that we have consensus, that there's both a vertical, so pre-K through 12, but also horizontal alignment, right? As we look at redistricting, ensuring that each student in a third grade classroom has a similar experience and similar access to the same types of supports. That's, really critical as we move forward. And I touched on before, but again, a message that I would hope to leave you with is the need to and the impact of educating diverse groups of learners, whether it be neurodiversity or cultural and linguistic diversity in general ed settings, and being thoughtful about that and always holding that lens up to our decision-making process and how we're doing our work. One of the flip side of that, and I expect I'm running over time now, so I'll be brief, but the number of out-of-district program placements we have, again, it's going to always be part of our continuum, certainly the 18 through 22 populations. These are students that may be in a variety of settings. There is a direct connection between our ability to support students and our continuum of services that I just talked about in district and how many students need to be supported in out-of-district placements. That ranges from students with particular types of learning needs, whether that be, for example, Clark's preschool that supports students who are hard of hearing. That was in Northampton up until recently. Or other schools serving students who are hard of hearing, for example, like Willie Ross. Or you talk about particular programs that support different cohorts. There are schools that specialize in providing high quality of care to students with are intensely impacted by spectrum disorders, or have significant reading disorders that require, really intensive and coherent and cohesive instruction throughout their day. Each of those has its place and is important. And we will never, no public school district will ever be able to do all of it in the same way, but we should be able to ensure that we are providing a high level care and instructional responses to students with those profiles, so that we can, especially it's the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure situation, that we can identify it and address it early, independent of those areas, so that students' gaps and needs aren't rising to a level where they can't be supported effectively in our district. And that's both important because we want to support our kids in their community schools in that least restrictive environment, but also it has some very real budget implications for this body that I think are critical. So it is very important for us to think about the direct connection between how we're standing up our organization and putting our folks in a position to provide high quality work to folks in the way that we are now, and these out-of-district placements. As well as there are some things just a function of special ed law. Some of these numbers are kids that we never see or have opportunity to make decisions about, right? It's literally just if folks lived in Greenfield, right, when they went into foster care, or their rights as parents were terminated, and they're there, right? So we always want to look at these with some skepticism and identify how we got there. The last piece, I just don't want to lose sight. We also look at in pupil services, we also support the English as a second language program for multilingual learners. That's of note because the last couple of years the numbers of students whose non-native English speakers, whose language of the home is not English, has increased dramatically. I think about a couple of years ago, we were hovering about 60, high 60s year over year, and then it jumped to 80. Last year jumped as high as 123 at one point. Now we're hovering about 100, right? A reasonable person would expect we're going to be there for the foreseeable future, and that has real ramifications, both in terms of the compliance side and the need to ensure our program is sound in that way, but also because of the very real scale of these services. So, for example, as the number of students across our buildings increases and the diversity of their level of English language proficiency increases, the ability to group them thoughtfully in instructional ways that are both age and skill appropriate becomes different. So we want to be thoughtful of that. I don't want folks to lose sight of the significant number at the high school, right, which is why we added the position this year. And again, a reasonable person, would expect we would need another position for next year to support this. As we get into those conversations in the months to come, the district is doing some really exciting work in terms of curriculum for ESL as part of our work with the state. Very similar to the work that's being done for high quality instructional materials, in other areas. What a lot of people don't think about is that English language is a core content area. It's just that some students are doing math, are doing 4 core area subjects. For students who are English language learners, they're doing 5. And I think the more we're able to help people understand that, it helps understand, certainly some of the conversations I'll be having as we get into the year. And then again, certainly a reasonable person would take a look and identify the increase in number of students who are identified as homeless or underhoused is in direct correlation to the opening of an emergency shelter expansion site recently. And again, we expect that that will begin to level off as the numbers, over the days in begin to shift and roll out in the next year, 18 months. But again, all that being said, each of these populations, each of these subgroups experiences our district and their school buildings in slightly different ways and has needs that are both, consistent with the needs of other learners, but additional challenges that may not be at top of mind for folks. So I'm so grateful for the chance to share with you tonight, and I look forward to additional opportunities to have conversation, because each of these can be thought of as a different facet, right, of the gem that is our school district, or a different lens to apply, say, how is one group or another advantaged or disadvantaged by the decisions we make. And I'm just super excited for the work that's happened last year into this year and for what's going on. One of the things I really hope to get some visibility with is our 2 parent advisory councils. We've had some traction recently getting additional core participants in our special ed parents advisory council, as well as continuing to ramp up our work with our English learners parents advisory council. And both of those are coming up. We've got a meeting next week. So there's a couple of things we can do. Certainly we can go to our website and folks can access that. And we look to increase visibility of some of that to reach folks that might not be looking different places or might not catch it in some of our current communication threads. But there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, and certainly the more folks can engage in those conversations, I think the more robust it is. So both of these parent advisory councils are really important ways for folks to be involved, as well as just exciting and really just interesting conversations. So I would urge anybody, even if they're unsure, or think that they might not necessarily be able to participate, I think you'd be surprised. Everybody's perspective is not only welcome, but necessary. So with that, I'd very interested.
Thank you. Yeah, any questions for Mr. Messing? Oh, yes, Mel.
So we get to see your bills. So some of my questions are directly related to that. And one of them is, I was very excited when we got a school psychologist. I mean, that was like a big thing to celebrate. But we're still paying for other outside consultants to do special ed evals. The numbers seem kind of high to me. Do you need another school psychologist?
Absolutely. Yeah, so at present, with the numbers that we're looking at, we would always expect to have probably 2.5 or 2 3/4 caseload in terms of if our school psychs were doing nothing but testing. At present, our school psychs do mostly just the psych testing, which is to say cognitive testing and behavior rating scales, and our special educators are doing, at present, the majority of academic or educational diagnostic or academic achievement testing, if you will. At present, we have one of the 2 budgeted school psych positions. We have 1 full-time psych. We're fortunate to have an intern whose workload is capped at about 1/3 or 1/2, 3/4 of what we'd hope a full-time psych would be able to do. So if a reasonable person would hope to get somewhere north of 70, evaluations, depending. Not all evaluations are the same. But I would expect in a district of our size, with the numbers of initials and reevals that we've saw, we've taken some steps to ensure we're not getting to a point of frivolous evals, so addressing at the front end, but certainly. So currently, last year, for example, we utilized the better part of 6 different contracted school psychs, which was helpful in terms of being able to get out of a significant hole in terms of, when I came on board in July of last year, we had a backlog that was over 2 years old. I literally wouldn't have believed you had I not walked into it. I spent half of my career, in this work. I wouldn't have believed what we walked into last year with a regard to the backlog of evaluations. We're fortunate, we just last week actually got caught up at the high school level in terms of being on target, and we are on pace to be compliant, for the end of this year, right, which is super exciting. So when we're talking about standing capacity or expectation for school psych, specifically psychological evaluations, absolutely, I would say, a district of our size, we would expect 2.5, 2 3/4 full-time equivalent. So when we're thinking about where we stand now, we have a full-time psych who's great, came to us an internship last year, stayed on board, is phenomenal. We're fortunate to have an intern again doing some of that work. And then what you see is effectively another full-time, effectively contracted psych. And then we see some ancillary things, whether they be bilingual, all of that. The last thing I would say on that is we've really leaned into technology. Being in Northern Franklin County, we're always going to be up against it. We are not the only ones that are short on school psychs, but we've really leaned into technology. I was skeptical because of the pandemic. What I had thought of at that point was people trying to do evaluations in a remote way because of some of the other issues of the pandemic at the time. We have leaned into an interaction with LilyPad Learning, actually, a startup, out of the eastern part of the state that's partnered with a lot of districts. And without a doubt, not only are they doing high quality work and able to support folks in a timely way with high quality evaluations and support teams in effective decision making for students, but we wouldn't be able to come compliant and be meeting our regulatory obligations to either students, families, you folks, or the state without it. So in short, yeah, I would certainly love another school psych. I have no illusions that we can reasonably expect to keep on staff more than 2 in district, salaried school psychs. So I would always, best case scenario, if we were able to have 2 full-time school psychs and, nearly 2/3 of the equivalent, I think that would allow us to be where we need to be. Especially because the only other way to do a part-time would be if you had a retired, somebody who's retired and wanted to work the equivalent of, 2/3 time.
Other questions? Oh, Member Goodwin.
So one of the things Greenfield Public Schools is worried about is attendance. And one of the things I would love to see data on is the attendance in our special ed population. Because one of the things that in the past, it was never discussed at team meetings, attendance was never brought up. So school psychologists, when they did evals, weren't talking about attendance. It's really hard to learn if you're not there. So looking at the attendance for these children who have 5 or 6 service providers who are pulling out their hair because the child's not there, that's something that I would love to see that data. Because when we talk about the fact that we're above state average, how many of the children who are in that category are just not coming to school is one of my concerns.
Other questions? Member Martini?
I wondered if you could briefly explain for folks what is the district's obligation when it comes to evaluation. There are timelines that need to be met, and what the repercussions are for the district if we don't evaluate in a timely manner, and whether or not our lack of staffing is considered an excuse.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So all of special ed law can be thought of as civil rights law, right? It came around the same time, mid-70s up through, most recently, the current version of it. So the reason that's helpful is one of the things is this timeline, right? You think about districts can't stall families on these things. So with regard to evaluation, either if a parent makes a recommendation for testing, has suspicions of disability, or another community stakeholder, members of the school staff, for example, they go through, they do the student sort of study team, and they're trying interventions, and they have concerns. As soon as that referral comes through, the district is on a timeline where we have to send out an evaluation consent form. That can be thought of as a permission slip. Any testing that we're not doing for all students in the way that we do MAP testing, sort of standard benchmark testing, we need to ensure we're getting parent permission for. So there's a timeline after which a parent either reaches out to us. It used to be in writing. It's now the state has blown the doors off of that, which is another conversation entirely. But we have a limited number of school days to be able to share with them a evaluation consent form for their consideration. And then one of the options parents have is to then accept those evaluations and return it to us. From the time we return that signed permission, so if they bring it into the central office, if they mail it in and it gets opened up, we essentially have a 45 school day window, 30 of those school days to get the testing done, unless it's towards the end of the school year, and then there's some additional pieces where you have to do it no later than 2 weeks at the end of the school year. But essentially 6 weeks is probably the most helpful way of thinking about it to complete the tests. That's a school psych doing their testing, that's a special educator doing their testing, or a related service provider doing their testing. And then the additional 15 days are for, which between the 30 and the 45, are for the team to come together, review those evaluations at an initial eligibility meeting, and do one of two things. In the event that a student is not found eligible, for example, if a student is not attending and they could have a disability, they could be educationally significant, but the reason for that gap isn't the disability, which is something that we try and do a better job of at finding what's going on, to speak to Member Goodwin's point. But the other 15 days between the 30 days to get the evaluations done, that 45th day, the district has to have met and done one of two things. If the student is not found eligible, provide written notice of that. We call that an N2, or notice of no finding. It's essentially just the formal notification that they were not found eligible, which in a lot of cases is great. It means there's things going on that will allow the student to derive benefit from their time at Greenfield Public Schools without the support. Or if they are found eligible and more, in some ways more timely, and certainly more time intensive, is furnish an IEP. So when we talk about a student who's eligible for special education at any one of our grade levels, that work of identifying what their needs are, planning for it, drafting the IEP, in the case of a special educator, for example, who's also juggling a host of other caseloads, other responsibilities each day, that absolutely matters. And I would say, to Member Martini's point, a lot of the findings from the previous program audit that we worked really hard to come pretty close to getting compliant with has been our ability to furnish parents either an IEP in the case of a child found eligible within 45 days, or a notice of no finding if they're not found eligible. And to speak to the question that was asked, the state isn't concerned one bit about why it didn't happen. They certainly aren't interested to hear that we don't have the capacity or that. There are some exceptions if the child wasn't available, if they were absent consistently and we couldn't test them. There are some things if the parent didn't make them available for testing. So there are some exemptions, but generally speaking, the state expects us to meet that timeline come hell or high water. So I think that's an important piece, because we don't get to say, we're doing our best. And that's one of the interesting parts about my experience, is I look at staff that are working very hard each day, and effectively what I'm saying to them is I appreciate that, and yet, the train's got to run on time. So that is a very important part of it, and it's not just staffing, but I think the timeline is important. Also opens the door to a much larger conversation about people's understanding, either this body or in general, about the very real legal framework of special education and English as a second language more broadly.
Thank you for that. That is related to my second question. Is it okay if I go ahead with that, or did someone else want to take a shot?
Do you want to go ahead?
Okay.
And then we'll go to-
So my question is about identification, early identification. I appreciated what you said about the need to intervene early with students in order to prevent the need for more intensive services later. And I would like to see at some point, I'm not asking you this off the top of your head right now, but I would like to see some data about how many of our students are being identified in or after the 3rd grade. And I would like to understand more about what the district is doing to coordinate between special education and general education so that we can identify students as early as possible and provide them the specialized instruction and accommodations that they need as early as possible, so that we can address our longer term numbers in special education in the district. So I don't know if there is anything you would like to offer off the top of your head about that right now. If so, please do.
I would say one of the things that certainly cuts across all disability profiles is early literacy, right? One of the reasons I'm so grateful for the work that's being done at present and the work that's been done even before I joined the district last July is without high quality early literacy instruction and without the ability to identify students that are not responding to that literacy instruction when provided, when they're attending regularly, and the ability to look at other potential options to allow them to be reading or able to access grade level text, at and beyond third grade is critical. It's not just students with reading difficulties that may be impacted. There are students who are presenting a variety of disability profiles for whom gaps in reading are only going to be exacerbated. So, whether we know more now about how to provide interventions of a variety of intensity, whether we're talking about those that are these small snapshots to fill in small gaps in one aspect of fundamental reading skills or another. But when we talk about ramping up and getting, I talked about vertical alignment and horizontal alignment, having consistency in the way our different elementary schools run their SST process, of course a little bit different because each school is different, has its own flavor, and needs to look a little bit different in the context of that building. Consistency where it matters in terms of how we are looking at regular intervals of particular indicators, in the case of reading, for example, indicators of dyslexia, and then how we are making decisions about that such that a student presenting in the same way across our 3 elementary schools has an equal or equitable opportunity to be identified and provided the same opportunities in that way. I think it's also instructive because, again, a lot of the work to support students with different learning needs can and should be done before special ed even comes into the conversation, if that makes sense. So that would be the one thing I would say now in terms of early literacy pieces and responses to that. So there's been a little bit of that work done. One of the things I'm really excited to do is have more opportunities for the types of interventions that can be interwoven into kids' programs without being overly disruptive. And that's very consistent with some of the recent work as we've shifted into understanding more about the science of reading, how to have those particular therapeutic doses of instruction in particular skills, and then being able to say, did it achieve the result or not? And then do we keep doing it until a student no longer requires it, or shift, to ensure that they're getting an intervention that is effective.
Member Sexton?
I have a few different questions. The first is just a numbers clarification. Are the IEP students and the 504 students mutually exclusive?
No, that's a great question. Generally, if a student is, in most cases, the only reason you would have, generally speaking, where we see students having both IEPs that are active and 504s are things like medical needs. If you have a medically significant allergy, for example, or similar, that's because it's reasonable that the IEP-related pieces might resolve and this other piece would still be there. I would say, generally speaking, the overlap is pretty small. If you were to say, what is the number of students who have both an active IEP and active 504, I would say likely single digits, pretty small. But no, not mutually exclusive in that way, which is to say having one doesn't preclude you from the other. I would say in most cases where a student is on a 504 and then is found eligible for an IEP, we'd be asking questions about what in the 504 would not just be subsumed into the IEP. And again, that's going to be medically significant allergies, things of that sort.
Yeah, mostly asking so that I can get a better sense of the overall percentage of our students that are receiving some kind of something. Another question is, can you say a little bit more about how we are building the capacity that we need to be able to offer more inclusion? So you mentioned the wanting to transition from more substantially separate to more inclusive strategies. So
yeah, so a lot of it is providing the opportunity for general ed classrooms to have the ability to support a variety of needs. Again, people tend to shy away from additional adult support because it has the capacity to be utilized both ineffectively and inefficiently, frankly. And what I mean by that is, if we're talking about ensuring that a general education teacher at any given grade level has the ability to bring a group of kids forward. For example, if I'm a high school biology teacher, right, I'm not teaching 180 days of content. I'm bringing a group of learners forward from where they are on the framework of biology content through the strands and topics, right, the scope and sequence of the bio content forward. How their ability, both with the materials, instructional materials they have, ability to differentiate up or down, but in most cases down, and by that I mean making grade level concepts, right, DNA replication, for example, life cycle, accessible to students who might be operating at a literacy level 3 or 4 grade levels below. Their ability to do so within reasonable expectation of their prep, and teachers are working, long hours anyway, but being able to do so within a time, that's one way capacity is increased. So, for example, as we look at providing resources or help them identify either practices, teaching practices that reach more students, whether we provide them with materials that promote students, whether we identify the types of supports that students in their classroom might need. So specifically identifying things that would interrupt or disrupt or interfere with a teacher's ability to run a classroom. And that is where adult support has a role. And I don't mean to say that adult support is everything. I mean to say that there's a lot of interventions and supports, both passive and otherwise, that can't be done by a single educator in a room alone. So that's one of the ways we can talk about capacity, is helping have folks have clarity about what that looks like, both so we as a group can be sure that adults that are identified, so in this case, for example, paraprofessionals, instructional assistants, both specialized in some cases and more generalized, they are clear on the ways in which their support can support or constrain kids' learning, right? So when we're talking about ways that we are increasing capacity to support more students in less restrictive environments, a lot of it is perspective building, right? Some of it is winning the hearts and minds, right? Communicating, whether it be the teaching to strengths type work that has been historical, whether it be the leading with dignity work that Superintendent Patnote is bringing the executive leadership team through now, helping win hearts and minds of the members of the school community, both school staff and otherwise, to the ability for all students to learn in inclusive settings, and then what that can look like. Being able to break down, not to be cliche about this idea of silos, but breaking down this wall between general ed and special ed, building a shared ownership of the success and progress of all students, right? They're all of our students, helping, literally, one of the most effective things I can do for the district is help build a shared understanding that if a student's identified for special education, they don't become special ed's responsibility, right? There's nothing that a special educator can do that is going to take the place of a student having access to a high quality general ed experience. And that's true across grade levels, across content areas. So in the same way, I don't just get to say, oh yeah, if only general educators would do more, right? That's not it at all. So it's arming them with the tools that they need to be able to do the things we're asking them, right? We're asking both general educators and special educators to do more than we ever have before as a field. So arming them with curriculum materials, arming them with instructional understanding and professional development related to how do I support a student, who may be navigating specific challenges, especially in the context of externalizing behaviors. So if I'm talking about an elementary student who may be academically capable, but be unable to remain regulated, at certain times, what are some effective ways to identify that early? What are some passive, proactive things that we can do? That has to do with increasing our level of behavioral support, whether it be in terms of the 2 district BCBA positions, whether it be the desire to have registered behavioral technician positions in the elementary schools, that work, where they're talking about the adjustment counselor work. There's a lot of both staffing capacity, instructional resource capacity, professional development, and then a lot of it literally is just perspective building, helping build a shared vision and understanding of what the general ed environment can and should look like, and what that can mean for different students. Another thing, and it's, especially as we think about like curriculum and instruction, if you think of the desire of bringing that group of kids forward, I use the example of the biology teacher, if we can help give teachers an understanding that, look, your job is not to cover 100% of those strands, your job is to bring the group of kids forward meaningfully, and thoughtful identification about the power strands, right, the power topics within that, or of making effective decisions about use of time, so that you are being thoughtful about reducing the impact on students' learning of that. there's a host of those. So in short, it's well beyond the time that I have. I appreciate the question. There's a variety of things that we're doing. It really has to do with arming folks with instructional materials, professional development, and messaging and visioning about how to do so. In short, I think.
Thank you. I have like 1.5 more questions.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So this next one requires a bit of a preamble, but I was thinking about those 87 students that were identified as un or underhoused. And you had mentioned that you expect that number to shift slightly as, you know, we know that the state is making changes to the emergency shelter policy, et cetera. But I'm curious about what we might be able to offer those students, even once they find semi or permanent housing. The experience of having been underhoused does not leave them, and that is sort of true. I'm sort of wondering, for students who are not directly part of one of these categories, but who we know are experiencing things that could impact their ability to show up in a classroom and be ready to learn, or to be receiving education effectively, what can we do for those students, and does that fall under your auspices?
Yes, and. Yeah, I think it has a lot of the things that we can do have already been done. The superintendent's support for transportation options for students that might not otherwise be able to do it. You know, again, certainly not all students that take advantage of the additional transportation solutions that the superintendent has, has authorized to allow more students access are homeless or underhoused, but it's certainly not without impact. Again, when we think about creating spaces where students are able to come to the average setting, whether it's a cafeteria, whether it's a library setting, whether it's a classroom setting, certainly, and not have the additional barriers that they don't have the bandwidth, right? We talk about the backpacks, right? All of us have backpacks. Some students have heavier loads in those backpacks, a lot of times which are invisible. So when we talk about the things we can do, it really starts with just creating and maintaining environments that are clearly communicating to students that they are seen, welcomed, and safe, and not in a kumbaya way, right? Not in an abstract way, but in a, these are things that we do to be very clear and explicit in sharing with students that we have regard for them, you know, that the classroom environment is a place where we welcome them and want them to be, that they are missed when they are not there. It has to do with the way we talk to kids. It has to do with the way that we respond when kids talk to us in ways that we might not always appreciate. You know, people talk a lot about being trauma-informed. They talk about the impacts on early development and all of that. Oftentimes what gets lost is some of the ways in which some of the folks that you're talking about are impacted. Their experience is because they don't show up necessarily, not only on metrics that we're reporting to the state, but they might not be visible, right? They don't have these indicators over their, over their heads that say, hey, please be gentle with me today. You know, I used all my bandwidth. So I would say more than anything, the things for us to do are ensure that we are creating environments and communicating with kids in ways that are sensitive to that, but also are not just being reactive to students that may be vulnerable or having some difficulty, but really proactive in communicating, the sense of comfort and safety and regard, in our schools. There's a variety of ways we can have conversation about difference of opinion and ways to do that, and the technical side of it, but more than anything, I would say that's it. And that's the through line between any of the initiatives that we look at that needs to be clear, because the absence of that serves to undermine any of the particular things we might try and do, whether it be getting kids to school, whether it be outfitting them, whether it's food security, and on down the list. That's the through line that we need to focus on, because we can sort of add technical elements to the other first order needs, but if we're never addressing that feeling of safety and comfort, I think we're missing the boat.
Thank you. My half question is, just the first part. No. What do you and your staff need from us to be able to best provide the education that you're wanting to provide for these kids?
Yeah, I think it's, a reasonable expectation of, the organization's functioning. We're fortunate to have a situation in district now where the focus of the district as a whole is more consistent with what is good for the needs of our most vulnerable learners than in a lot of districts. And what I mean by that is the district's current instructional focus, the priorities of the district as a whole are consistent with the types of improvements instructionally and otherwise that will allow us to do better. I think anything we can do to improve consistency or or reduce churn, whether that's policy, whether that's staffing, those types of things are going to be important. But I would say more than anything, ensuring that we're not discontinuing or disrupting current initiatives that are proving effective, and that we're raising up the visibility of the impact of certain decisions that might be made or not made with an eye for that. I think that, for me, would be the most important thing. It's not just, we need staffing, we need this or that. We're actually we've got a lot of protective factors. We've got a lot of reason to be encouraged in district here. I would think if this body is taking into account how decisions advantage or disadvantage particular groups of students, that would be the main thing. Because there are particulars that are going to be different in time. But I think that's the main piece I would look at. What is the tip-to-tail experience of a student at any grade level, and how decisions that this body is making impact that, either the building unit of analysis, the classroom of analysis. That's the real way, if that's fair.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Messing? Member Goodwin?
Can you tell me how many instructional assistants we have?
Off the top of my head, it'd be interesting. I'd have to think about, in the different buildings, looking at different vacancies. Depends if I include the two that I have to submit, in terms of at some point in the future. But no, I wouldn't want to give you a number today without the context of where some of those positions are. I came from a meeting earlier today that informs it. There are a couple of plans that are in process that are going to inform it. That's fair.
Other questions? Member Martini?
I wanted to carry on from Member Sexton's question, or last half question, because that really gets at the reason why I asked for this presentation previously, which is about student achievement. It's something that this committee has talked about periodically, not enough in my opinion. In our accountability data that was recently presented by the assistant superintendent, we saw some nice gains for certain groups of students, but the one group that really didn't have any gains was our students with disabilities. And I'm also keenly aware that a teeny tiny percentage of our students with disabilities are able to meet expectations on the MCAS in grades 3 to 8, for example, and are otherwise showing indicators of not making what probably many of their parents would consider to be meaningful progress. And what the law asks us to do for students with disabilities is to prepare them for higher education and employment and independent living. So I appreciate all of the data that you provided tonight and the discussion about having students as much as possible in the least restrictive environment planfully so that they can receive what they need that cannot be delivered there. And I would also like to see a lot more data and information about the achievement of our students with disabilities. That leads me to my questions, which are probably too big for this evening, but I would like to know what are the biggest gaps? What are the biggest needs? What would be the most impactful things that the district could do to improve its capacity in special education to serve our students? In order to answer those questions, I think we would need more information about where our students in different disability groups, for example, are falling when it comes to achievement. So I would love to see you back here at some point in the near future with more information about that.
Yeah, and even the question is worded, right? I think it requires each of those pieces to be teased out, because the differences aren't necessarily going to be similar across achievement areas, across grade levels. So I would want to make sure we were able to give that its due sort of consideration, and certainly well beyond disability. But each of those is important, and thinking about, for all the things that might be common contributing factors or root causes, in some ways what's more instructive is the differences in the ways kids are impacted, whether it be by disability profile or an achievement area, for sure.
Any other questions from the committee? I guess I have a thought. I don't know if it's as much a question, but maybe you can respond. I'm wondering, given how expensive the out-of-district placements are, if there was a way to, if we had found some way to invest more resource in, for example, years 1 and 2, and it resulted in year 3 having one fewer person in an out-of-district placement, it may have been well worth that investment. That's not exactly the way city budgets and school budgets work, but I wonder if you have any thoughts about what that investment might look like that might help us to reduce those placements.
Yeah, that's certainly a longer conversation that we have time for. And again, I'd love to have that conversation in earnest when we have the full breadth. I would say, in short, what we're likely to come up against is what are legitimate limiting factors. And what I mean by that is, if we were to lay out the types of investment you're talking about that would result in decreased need, it is very likely a reasonable person would expect that we would be hard-pressed to make that manifest, even with the blessing and goodwill of this body, just because of structural factors, which is to say, if I were to identify particular areas of growth, and we were to think that if we were able to provide more adults to provide a higher dose or intensity, more of a certain service in a certain area, that it would do so, a reasonable person expects that we'd be unlikely to fill those additional positions, for example. I think that would be the one thing that I would want to be concerned about. And yes, you're absolutely right. There is a perverse incentive in a lot of ways, when you talk about the different layers of government and all of that, for people to not be future planning in that way. I certainly understand the time value of budgets, in terms of this year's budget as opposed to future benefit. So that, that's nuanced in a lot of ways, and of course there's a lot of particular conversations around that. But I think what we would want to include in part of that conversation, if we were having it in a really candid way and comprehensive way, is with the full bore, what are the parameters that are going to be constraints, and that leads us into how do we reduce the impact of those barriers. For example, in what ways can we leverage technology to overcome some of the reduced access to labor force? For example, if we're talking about language access for low incidence languages, for example, interpretation and translation. We wouldn't be able to do the work we do if I wasn't able to reach out and get an Albanian interpreter, from somewhere across the world, right? These low incidence, we don't have a lot of Greenfield residents that speak Bantu dialects, right? Like that sort of stuff. So that's part of the conversation, is if there was a desire and a good faith effort to invest that intensive resources to achieve what you're talking about achieving, what are the other ways that we would have to look at actually making that so? And then more to the point, I think one of the things that I would want to make sure is that we were ensuring it was sustaining, so that it isn't just benefit this year or next year. How are we taking those steps to make an investment that have lasting benefits on students that are, if it was a certain grade level, if we said, hey, we care a lot about grades, K1, 2, that students this year that were in K, next year that are in K, the year after in K, so that's lasting, right? So we're not feeling as though the benefit of any investment, whether monetary or otherwise, is fleeting, you know, that it's lasting, and we can feel really as though we've been fiscally responsible in investing in an enduring way.
Thank you. And part of your answer made me think that part of it may be a conversation with our legislators about how to try to address some of that, the pipeline of workers and what is going on at the state level to try to increase the number of candidates for those types of positions, because you're right, that's something that's kind of beyond the scope of this body and of your work, but it's the environment that you're hiring within that is creating a lot of the obstacles that you're talking about. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time, and I guess we'll be seeing you again soon. Thanks. All right, Andy Paquette has joined us. Andy, if you are ready to.
Sure, thank you. You have in your packets the December 24 FY25 budget update. We did as requested. I've attached a narrative summary regarding the highlights of the budget report for the grants and the local budget. So I can just walk you through that and then answer any questions you might have. As the practice has been in Greenfield, we charge the expenses to the local budget, and then we work with the city, come into the year and do our final reclasses to the revolving accounts to make it easier as far as a one-time adjustment. So as I referenced in the middle of the report, with as we know, there's some turnover that experiencing on the city side. So there are encumbrances from the last payroll that have not been reduced. We wanted to be able to get the report to you in time to review. So I've, in a sense, had to reduce that when I walk you through I'm going to call it the true balance available. So there's $674,000 of the last payroll that for hitting the local budget that, in a sense, are double encumbered. It's in hitting the expense line and also in the encumbered for the respective salary lines. So when you walk through that, along with our other funding sources from when we built the budget as to what we're going to use, as of this day, we're having what I'm calling a preliminary surplus of $384,407.72, which is only 1.62% of our FY25 budget. I will refer you to the presentation that I did. This is actually a good practice in the sense that, having 98% of your budget encumbered and or committed is it's a good internal control to make sure that you don't overspend the budget. Even with the fact that there are some expenditures, some of the normal year-end expenditures that might not yet be encumbered, so that 384 will be reduced. But again, administration, we feel that we're at a comfort level regarding ending the year in a positive balance. Similar issue with encumbered in the payroll. There are some revenues that haven't been posted yet on the revolving account, so I've summarized those there. All that means is that, as of right now, when you look at the revolving account report, for those accounts in particular, school lunch, circuit breaker, school choice and transportation, we're actually in better shape than what it is that's shown. So this is like the standard narrative that we provide, but without further ado, I can answer any questions you might have, or attempt to answer any questions you might have regarding the update.
Questions for Andy? Member Goodwin?
Are we encumbering salaries of people we haven't hired yet?
Say that again, sorry. Are we encumbering
So
the salaries
Right,
of people that haven't been hired yet?
there are positions that are unfilled.
I'll have to go and review those. Most of the times we don't, but if there is a position that was left mid-year, it could be a timing issue where those salaries could still be encumbered.
Other questions? Thank you very much, Andy, and thanks very much for the narrative report. I found that personally very helpful and appreciate the members who advocated for that, and Susan Farber, who did some research to help us deduce there was no apparent conflict with school committee policy that would prevent you from doing that, so thank you.
No problem.
Moving on to the Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Sullivan.
Good evening, everybody. Excuse me.
Maybe move it even closer.
Okay, so everyone has my report. Last month, I actually shared that we were kicking off the reading challenge, the Stick to Reading Challenge with the Springfield Thunderbirds, and wanted to follow back up on that. That we did launch the Stick to Reading Challenge on Wednesday, November 27th. There are pictures in this update again, as Boomer, the Springfield Thunderbirds mascot, attended each of our schools' turkey trot. The superintendent and I, along with Boomer and some of his handlers, made our way around the town on that Wednesday half day. And I think we got to all the turkey trots. One school, he was able to visit some classrooms because they had gone inside. But again, just encouraging students to find joy and enjoyment in reading. I've seen some teachers talking to students about the reading challenge already. I've said to students and teachers that the idea of this was to encourage students to find enjoyment in reading at home, but if they're doing it in school and they're enjoying it, then they can certainly fill in their log for their right to a free ticket to the Saturday, January 25th game down in Springfield, where they'll host a Greenfield night. We will be in touch with some more information about tickets and reaching out to families if they're looking for transportation as well. So looking forward to that in late January. I also included, it's probably difficult, you won't be able to do it on your hard copy, but in the folder there is the press release that we had sent out on that. So a little bit more information about that and comments from the Thunderbirds as well. Couple of grant updates in terms of the Innovation Career Pathway. We had to submit a Part A application by the end of October. We submitted that and found out, I think December 2nd, we got the email that we were invited to do the Part B application. So the next step of the Innovation Career Pathway work is underway. Essentially, the Part B application is a more in-depth application where we're providing potential course sequences, courses that could be included in the Innovation Career Pathway, recruitment materials, and such. So the Career Pathway team is working on that, and we're meeting with our partner from Mass Hire, Matt Allen, next Thursday afternoon for an update, and the Part B application is due in early February. Since we last spoke, I had the Acceleration Academy grant was a grant that we had applied for when I spoke in November. We have since received that grant as well. That will allow us to offer Acceleration Academies. The second paragraph is more about what the Acceleration Academy should look like, and that allows us to offer these in February and April. So there's a meeting for grant recipients next week that I'm attending, and then I'll be working with our principals to get this rolled out and begin to start identifying staff and students to participate in the Acceleration Academies. And then finally, I wanted to share, this was not a grant that I had mentioned last month, but the Mass Cultural Council Creative Projects for Schools grant. We pursued a grant for all 3 of our elementary schools to have essentially an artist in residence for a period of time this winter and spring, and we found out that we received $5,000 grant for all 3 elementary schools. So we're partnering with local artists, Sarah Ahern Bellemare, And we've titled the project Hand in Hand, a Mural to Connect Our Community. And the idea is it will engage every student to create a large-scale mural inspired by abstract quilts. We've also thought that these murals at all 3 elementaries will be movable. So if at any point in the future schools come together or anything like that, we'll make sure that the murals can also come together. It's also focused on inclusive and collaborative art lessons. Students will design individual quilt squares that will be combined into the mural that will be displayed at each school. And we're very grateful to, obviously, Mass Cultural Council and Sarah Hearn Belmar for supporting this meaningful project.
Superintendent? We'll do questions together for you two.
Just a quick update that the DESE district site review was the week of November 18th through the 22nd. The data collection folks that did all of the site visits, the stakeholder interviews, as well as are compiling our preliminary report, have been in touch with Stephen and I the last week or so just to get some clarification on some fact-finding issues that have arisen, and hopefully we will have some initial reports soon, and then once those findings are in its final form, we will report back out to you what they have delivered to us. Redistricting, don't forget, still happening. We have been working really hard, though, to talk to every family who is affected by the redistricting lines and redrawn street addresses for 25-26. We did initial site visits to Leiden Woods and Oak Courts. We also did a virtual information session for all of the families. We sent out letters, and we had about 40 or so families that were not responding. So then we did backpack letters, we've done personal phone calls, and we've been following up this week so that every family has the opportunity to make the choice for their child. As of my report time, it was 10 families we were still waiting to connect with, but I'm happy to report today it's 8. So I'm going to make sure we get those other 8 to respond to us. Our next step, though, obviously will be to coordinate with TravelCuz and talk about transportation needs for our 3 elementaries in the 2025-26 school year, because you did vote to provide transportation for those folks who chose to age out of their current homeschool or transfer to their new. So we will be working with the bus company. I had a meeting this morning with the high school folks, and we talked about scheduling because the students have selected their coursework for 2025-26. So we've been working on enrollments and class projections there, which will create the waterfall effect down to the middle school and then down to the elementary. I will be meeting with that administration in the coming days, and then we'll meet with our union leaders and talk about potential staffing needs and changes for the 25-26 school year. So please know that all of that work is going on behind the scenes, and we're constantly in communication with families affected as well as the staff in short time. Staffing updates. Unfortunately, we accepted the resignation of our Director of Behavior Services, Katie Miller-Murphy, and our District and State Data Manager, Deborah Coons, for personal reasons. So they will be finishing up their time with us shortly. We are actively searching for replacements for both those positions, and the jobs are posted. So if anyone knows anyone, please send them our way. We happily welcomed Carol Jacobs to Newton Elementary as our interim principal last week on Thursday, December 5th. She hit the ground running and is certainly happy to be back in Greenfield. And we're really happy to have her on board. She joined our E-team yesterday and was really just a positive influence on taking over at Newton, so we appreciate her efforts. We are still looking for instructional assistants, custodians, and food service positions, and all of those positions are on School Spring if you're interested. And we also continually encourage volunteers, parents, caregivers, school committee members, if you want to come and help out, if you have time at our elementary schools, lunch and recess is definitely in demand, and we would appreciate your time if you are able. There are some capital updates based on some information that's been unfolding as of late. The Federal Street elevator, the project did go out to bid by the city. We had one sole bid, which was NV5, which came in at $222,668. We have current capital funds that have been in a capital fund account from previous allotments in the total of $181,989. So we are short, obviously, a deficit of $40,679. So my proposal this evening would be that the district allocate school choice funds to fund the difference so the district can complete the Federal Street elevator project.
Can we maybe get the whole report, then do questions, then come back to the motions for things like that?
Sure can.
Thanks.
The other capital update is the middle school fire panel project. In October, the school committee approved a capital expense submission for $150,000 for FY26, which was submitted to the city when the capital requests were made. And then after that, the district received an additional site visit from Fire Equipment Incorporated. And upon their further inspection, the upgrade is obviously going to be exponentially higher due to the fact that the GMS system, as they called it, is quote unquote obsolete. So the struggle is really finding replacement parts that are no longer available. So in order to fix all of the components and upgrade at GMS, the new estimate is $315,000. There is a little snafu in that as well, though, that there is some talk of future state requirements from the state fire marshal that any upgrades to new fire alarm systems may have to include a voice-over announcement instead of just having a fire alarm sound. It's not currently in effect, but it could be coming down the pike. So the facilities director, Mike Boudreau, just wanted me to add that potentially by the time this project would go through capital and actually get bid on and be implemented, there could be an additional $100,000 if we had to include the voice-over system. So currently, the increase would be $315,000, but the potential could be $415,000 at a later date. We have had a request from Member Goodwin in the past for enrollment updates, so I decided to include them in my update, thinking it would probably be easier than just reading the numbers, and that way you can compare what was from month to month. So I will just continue to update those each month, but those are obviously you can read on your own. We currently, as of December, I think it was 9th, it was run, we have 1366 in district. And then lastly, I just really want to, if you haven't seen it, my parent update, or haven't been part of the project with your students that are in our district, I really just want to let the community know the Unity initiative that we've rolled out as of December 2nd. We're really trying to unite students, staff, families, community members into the important role that they all play in the lives of our students each and every day, and how you all are very valuable members of the Green Wave Nation. We want to continue to support all of our students, accept diversity, welcome all of them, care for them, and make sure that they know that when they enter our halls that they are part of our community, which they belong to, and that we love and care for each and every day. So what we've been doing is launching some unity messaging every morning and having days of the week where we can start to build stronger relationships with one another and really incorporate some great chances for students to really get to know all those members of their community, whether they're adults or other students that they don't talk to. So we have an ongoing initiative each day of the week, and you can talk to our students and our staff about maybe being caught being amazing. So we are taking a Be Kind initiative. We have shirts and stickers and wristbands and announcements, and you will see the picture I shared was the Federal Street students who were caught being amazing, and they got the reward of having lunch with their principal. So all of those students you see there were very excited to eat with Miss Halpin. So I encourage you to join in on our initiative and really celebrate our community and shine a light on all the good things that Greenfield Public Schools do.
Thank you. Let's do any questions related to anything besides the capital items, which were the elevator and the fire panel. For either Mr. Sullivan or Ms. Patnod. Yes. Member Martini.
In regards to the Stick to Reading event, I wanted to know if we are able to provide transportation to those students who win those tickets and may not be able to go if they don't have it.
Yes, so that's something that we're working on, and we're planning to offer transportation to those who wish to go to the game, but they might not be able to get there on their own.
Thank you. And slightly, another question related to the same topic. Are the announcements and information related to that program going home to parents in their primary languages?
Yes, they are. Primary languages, and we're also looking into purchasing some tickets for families who may wish to go but may not be able to. So transportation and tickets we're thinking about and working with the Thunderbirds.
Member Sexton?
This is regarding the enrollment update. I was wondering if you had any information about where some of these students are going and why.
The majority of our moves have been due to some of our folks in the Days Inn who have been actually housed. So the majority of the moves you see are because they've moved to Sunderland. Most of them have gone to, the name of the apartment complex is escaping me right now. Yeah. So, no. Dave? Yes. Cliffside, thank you, sorry. Is that what you said, Susan? I'm sorry. Yeah, Cliffside, yeah. So those moves have happened, and thankfully for them, and they are having a great experience being housed.
Other questions? Member Martini.
In regards to staffing, what is our current rate of successfully finding substitute teachers when we need them? I mean, having an actual substitute as opposed to using an IA or some other member of our staff to cover that.
We have a very low substitute population pool, so that creates a very big strain on building operations every day. On average, district is seeing between 20 and 40 absences across 6 schools. And we have about 4 solid subs that report to duty every day. So it is definitely a strain on operations. It's a strain on the current staff that are in school. It's a strain on our IAs. It's a strain on our principals.
Other questions? Thank you. Okay.
Can I just say Wednesday is Help Each Other Out Day, so if you were caught helping someone out today, you could get a sticker before you leave. Just want to share that.
You all deserve a sticker. You are here. You get double stickers, Superintendent. All right. So the first is the elevator. So I'd like to hear a motion to use $40,679 of fiscal year 25 school choice funds to fund the difference between the allocated capital expenditures and the amount of the NV5 bid for the Federal Street School elevator project.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, discussion? Yes, please, Member Childs.
It's so important we get this done quickly. Our staff over at Federal Street School having to haul heavy things up and down those stairs, it's a safety issue for them as well as an accessibility issue. So this has gone on for way too long. Let's get it done.
Love it. Any other comments?
This is a question. I intend to vote yes, but I do want to understand what are the possible implications of moving these monies? And are there any potential negatives from not having that 40K in that school choice account?
I'm going to defer that because I don't see any negatives.
Yeah.
Yes.
May I
Andy.
answer? Yes, no, there would be no negatives. As we proceed through the year, there have been some changes as far as, honestly, between vacancy savings and also some additional funds that come in. As you remember, when we build these budgets, we build them a year in advance. And so when we built the budget on some of the grants that we were anticipating receiving, we actually got more than we had. We were conservative in our budget estimates. So again, I refer back to the presentation that we did where I referred to, I believe, the legitimate shell game of moving expenses to then free up the funds to be able to do this.
Any other discussion? Mayor?
So you're taking that, we want to move that from account 1521?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? Member Goodwin?
So I'm flashbacking. I've been hearing about this elevator for decades. How many times, it's been repaired before, so I guess as we go through this process, if they fix it, they better fix it. I mean, it's been fixed a lot.
I will let them know that.
Other questions or comments? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. All right, for this one, you'd say choose your own adventure. I would hear a motion to either increase the FY26 capital request for the GMS fire panel from 150K to 315K, or if you want to plan for the possibility of voice requirements, then it would be 415K. So when you say you're making the motion, just say 315K or 415K.
I will move to increase the FY26 capital request for the Greenfield Middle School fire panel from $150,000 to $415,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Member Sexton. Any discussion? Mayor DeZorger?
So I was just sitting here thinking that I wanted to ask the fire chief if they knew if they put that law into effect, or do you know if usually there's a term and there'll be, as of such and such, you'd have to do that. I was going to advocate for 315, but do you have any knowledge on that?
So
Superintendent?
Alex Cooley is who was talking with Mike
Okay.
Boudreau about that, just saying it could be coming down the pike, but I'm not sure the ifs and whens, and if you had more information or could find more, or we could certainly reach out to Chief Strahan about the potential, but I guess it's looming in the state fire marshal arena, which is why they just wanted us to be aware with regards to this project.
So I'm not gonna vote for the 415. I'd vote for 350. I would make a motion, a counter motion to go for 315,000. If we need to come back for that, I would certainly be in favor of it. I just got a lot of news today that were all capital things that were going to be very expensive as we're preparing to be moving City Hall, so for short term, because of line collapses in water and sewer. So I would say 315,000 and we would come back and certainly vote for that if we get more information about it. But I'd look forward to hearing from you as well. If you feel strongly, or all of you feel strongly the other way, I'll go with whatever we decide.
Can someone share a little bit more about the capital request process? Like if we put in 315K, or it seems easier to put in for 415K and find out later we don't need the extra 100K and then just say, oh, we don't need that as much as we asked for? How does that work, Mayor?
So I will take that one because I understand that. Many times you come through with an estimate of what you think it's going to be. Sometimes it's less and sometimes it's more. Generally people they may overestimate a little bit. But if there's a shortfall on whatever it is at the time, we come back for another order for whatever it is. I mean, we did that this year already. Something will be more than it is. But the hard part is there's so many departments with capital needs that you're sitting and looking at every capital need. Like this person I think we have 4 or 5 trucks or cars and in DPW that are, they're like 20 years old with 150,000 miles on it. So you have to make a decision. And although it might not sound like it, that 100,000 would be something that you'd say, well, we're absolutely not going to do this year because you have so many asks. So if we don't know right now that law is not in effect, I'd say, well, we do know it's going to be 315,000. That's where I am. Certainly, when it goes out and it comes back, and we have to do that, but I guess I'd like to get a little bit more information on it than putting it up to 415. But it's the will of the group.
Are there questions or comments or discussion about the motion? Member Martini?
I'd like to ask the mayor a clarifying question, and I'm sorry if I'm being obtuse. Say we request 315 and that is approved, and then come July, this new requirement comes out, then would we not need to go through the following year's capital process, in which case we would be looking at the next year, like waiting an additional year in order to get that approval, or no?
Yeah, Mayor Disorder.
So, for example, this year we paved the DPW yard, and the cost of paving went up. So we had approved that project, and then it ended up being more than it was. So we did the project in that year, and then put in an order for additional funding.
And when you say an order for additional funding, that means you go to the city council for that? Okay.
Mhm.
And, yeah.
It isn't that you make that project wait another year. To answer my fellow teammates' question, you don't put the project off for a year, but we had 2 things that I can think of. Another thing that came through. We were just an IT project that we waited 6 months, and the bid was higher, and it had been approved by the capital committee, but the dollar figure was higher, so we put an order through for more than it was. So, for example, if we put that order through for 315,000, and we know you have it written that way, and we know 5 or 6 months from now, or whenever, it won't be 5 or 6 months, it will probably be May that we would be voting on that. And if we know that for sure, then the order that we'd put forward would be for a higher amount. It's just that there are so many capital requests this year that's just my thought on it.
Thank you. Other discussion?
question for the
Martini.
superintendent. Is this the type of project that can be done in two pieces? Can we do the project that we were expecting to do, and then should this voice requirement come through, is this system in which that capability can be added at a later date easily, or no?
I don't know that answer 100%, but from my discussions with our facilities director, the wiring capability at the time has to be programmed for voiceover. So I don't think it can be done in two parts, but I don't know that for certain. I certainly can get that information for you.
Other questions or comments? Discussion? I guess I wonder if they do change the law, I imagine that there would be, all over the state, there would be a need to upgrade, and whether the state would factor in at creating funds for town buildings, school buildings to do, they're just gonna do it as an unfunded mandate, you think? Well, just a thought. Yes, Member Childs.
So from this, it's for new fire systems installed. That means if we were to try to rush in under the wire and start the install and then this unfunded mandate came down, then would it apply or not? It seems like we just need more information on what exactly the rule would be, when the rule would happen, and then even the technical, like, would there be a way that we could have it installed with the voice add-on in the future as a possibility? I have so many questions that I feel underinformed and not well-informed enough to be reasonable on this. Sorry.
Member Sexton.
I'm presuming that if a rule is coming down like this, they are doing it for some kind of safety reason, that it actually might be in our interest to have the voiceover system. This is my assumption. I could be totally wrong. And so that's why I would support allocating us to go for that system now, if we think that, one, it's coming down the pike anyway, and two, if it is actually the safer of the options available to us, then we should do it. That's my reasoning. I am also wondering if we should postpone this discussion until next month so that we can get some of these questions answered.
Do we have time for that? If we delayed it?
I would love to ask the mayor, because I don't know the timelines on that, because we do need to think about fixing this ASAP.
Yes, it's certainly a priority to do it. The capital committee will start meeting in January, so a dollar figure should be put in there. But if capital committee approves this for 315, and we find out by the time we're putting a financial order in, which I would certainly prioritize this as something that is needed, but if we know in a couple of months that the law is changing or it is necessary for us to do that, the financial order that will go in would be higher than what the capital, committee had approved. That happens as well. That happened with, we have a figure and something changes because of costs increase. So a few months later is a few months later and you know more, but you put the dollar figure that you know at the time. What we know right now for sure is that it's going to be 315. That's what I meant. I'm all for safety as well, but what we know now is this dollar figure. I just was hearing the first time, there may be a law that is coming. Do you know what I'm saying?
Member Deneve?
Oh, I was going to say the exact same thing that Member Sexton said about potentially postponing it until we gather more information. If they're meeting in January, and we're also meeting in January, if our meeting happens before then, we could scuttle over some numbers in time. might be worth postponing for a bit to gather intel.
Our meeting is January 10th. So I don't know when the capital committee's meeting, how late in the game we can get things to you. The other piece is that we may be looking at a special school committee meeting, an extra meeting getting scheduled before the end of this year. So maybe we'd have more info by then. But I guess to me, it seems like we probably will not have the information about whether the system is actually required before January 8th. So, Member Martini?
I have another question for the mayor. Can the capital committee not approve a smaller amount than was requested? If the committee requests 415, they are given the context, they approve 315 for now.
They'll approve the dollar figure that, is put in front of them.
They'll do an up or down approval or disapproval of the whatever number is put forward.
That's a very valid point.
Wait, when you say it's a valid point, you mean it was a good question, but the answer is no, it's an up or down vote on whatever number we put forward. Okay, I'm seeing you nod. Okay. Let's see, I guess are we ready to vote? Good. Let's see what happens. So, just a reminder, the motion was to increase the FY26 capital request for the GMS fire panel from $150K to $415K. Well, the mayor advocated for $315K. I haven't heard the request for a friendly amendment or an acceptance of a friendly amendment. So the original motion was $415. That's what's on the table now.
I move to make a friendly amendment for it to be $315,000.
Member Martini, do you accept the friendly amendment?
I would like to hear the views of other members as to whether they would want that amendment.
Okay, discussion. Member Goodwin?
The word obsolete fire panel, I think we get this in the pipeline at 315, knowing that this is a priority because it's a safety issue, and knowing that it's children and a safety issue, knowing that the city council would bump it up if it comes in higher. I think the sooner this is in the pipeline, the better. I think waiting for some law in this world is just, every day is different, but if it's on paper in front of people at 3:15 and it says obsolete fire panel, I think it'll get done. That's my gut.
I just want to say I appreciate Member Goodwin's point, and that is why I would like to vote on one of these two amounts tonight and not put it off to our next meeting.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak to the request to Member Martini for the friendly amendment to reduce the motion from 415 to 315? Member Childs?
I have a question for the mayor. So what is the practical impact of asking for the 415 but then only needing 315 versus asking for the 315 and then having the money later added on if needed? Is it something that's better for the town on paper or something that...
There's more projects that that you could fund this year. And certainly, I saw this one for the school. It's a priority. That it's just math. You have to add all of the things that everybody has requested. I'm already looking at the list, and this far, the requests outnumber the funds that we have. There's no question in my heart that the safety ones come first. So I would, as long as the capital committee approves it, I would put that order forward. But you have just so much to spend, and I'm starting to look at them now and thinking there's more than we have the expenditure for on paper right now.
So if we do the 315 and then that extra 100,000, we're not asking then, but we later need, would that have already been allocated somewhere else? How do we make sure we could still get it if needed?
So it actually generally works out. We have one thing that's coming up tonight, a big, one thing that's coming up very shortly, and you cannot purchase something unless you have allocated the funding for it. And but you don't pay for that until it's received. So it's really, so I know of one big thing that we probably will be approving, and we won't be expending that funds, but I do have to do the math, and it has to add up. And but it's really the number of projects that you can approve. That's really what it is, and I just know the number of requests.
Can I?
Yeah, Member Martini?
I'm sorry, I need to ask another clarifying question. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what Member Childs was getting at is what's the likelihood of the possibility that we request 315, we need 415, and then we're not able to get the additional 100,000 because we didn't request it up front.
I've heard the mayor say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor, but you're pretty optimistic that an order could be put forward to the city council and they would fund the extra 100K.
Right. It frequently happens that things cost more than you might think, and it frequently happens that things are less. This one, I was just listening to, how this was presented tonight, and I thought, well, it sounded like what we really knew it was going to cost was so much. So that would have been the number I would have put in. That's all. But this just happened with an IT project. It was 6 months later, and a lot more, I don't know, $30,000 or $40,000 more. You've already committed to do that, so I don't see an issue with that. I would just rather take the number that we knew. That we knew for sure that it's going to be this much. The other one was a law that had not been written yet. Do you know what I'm saying? And I know how long a law takes to write. I think you probably do, some of you do as well. We were waiting for a charter change, and you do your steps here, and then you send it into the state, and it was 1.5 years later. And so if people are talking about that, we had a little bit more research to do. Even by May, the time that we were putting orders in, we don't know factually anything about where that is. I wouldn't put an order through 5 months from now for a dollar figure that was inaccurate either. If the law had changed, it's frequently something gets through one committee and the numbers are a little different for one reason or another.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I'll share my view. While I respect that probably the voice is optimal way of alerting people of a danger, I just have a hard time imagining a situation where all the alarms are going off and someone is somehow threatened because we didn't spend the 100K on a voice alert system. And since, as the mayor said, the law hasn't come down yet to say that we are required to do this, I guess I do feel better putting it forward as 315K, because that's what we actually need today. So in your deliberation, Member Martini, about whether to accept the friendly amendment, that's my view.
Thank you. I just wanted to hear other people's views. I will accept the mayor's friendly amendment. So the motion is now to change, sorry, let me do this again, to increase the FY '26 capital request for the Greenfield Middle School fire panel from $150,000 to $315,000.
Second.
Wait, there was already a second to that motion, so whoever seconded it needs to accept the,
Accept.
Stacy seconds.
okay, Member Sexton accepts the friendly amendment as well as the second. Is there any other discussion before we vote? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. It's now 8:10. You are entitled to a 5-minute break, during which I suppose stickers could be administered. All right, we resume our meeting. We are up to the consent agenda, which now has one item on it, approved minutes of full committee meeting, November 13, 2024. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Report of the chair, I have no report. Budget and Finance Subcommittee?
Okay, so we met recently and discussed two things. We had a discussion in regards to the process of approving warrants, which was sent off to Budget and Finance to discuss and make a recommendation about. And we did discuss the fact that we have a policy about this, and we're not certain that this ought not to be in the policy subcommittee and not Budget and Finance. However, we went ahead and discussed it anyway and arrived at a consensus suggestion for our warrant process. Because in the past we required a quorum of the committee to approve warrants, and that process was frequently cumbersome and resulted in last-minute approvals that were stressful for the administrators responsible. Being the reason that we went to one member signing, we did not feel that going back to a quorum signature requirement would be advisable. However, we do want, of course, members to feel like they are able to ask any question that they would like to ask about warrants, and to be able to bring a question if they're not able to get an answer that's satisfactory to them to the committee. So the suggested process that we would like to put forward is that members ask their questions related to the warrant at least a week ahead of time before school committee meetings. The superintendent will take every effort to answer those questions, and if a member has a remaining question that either wasn't answered or there was not an answer that was satisfactory to them, to please bring that question to the attention of the chair for the agenda at the following meeting. Am I saying that correctly? Okay. Member Childs, I feel like I'm forgetting something.
Closest thing to forgetting, it's not so much forgetting as a clarification. This is bringing the warrant for discussion, not saying that we're not signing the warrant or not paying our bill. It's more of, so the questions might be asked after the warrant is signed if needed.
Correct. So this would make no change to the process of signing and approving the warrants, but would provide more codification to the asking of questions and the getting answers to questions. That's the other thing I forgot. We also wanted to suggest that the chair put warrants as a standing placeholder in your meeting planning template, so that should a member have a unanswered or, in their view, unsatisfactorily answered question ahead of a meeting, that you already have it in your planning template for meetings, and it does not get lost.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. We can't, I mean, with the recent kind of changes to what the city clerk's office will approve or not approve in terms of our agendas, we can't just like, well, somehow this got on there, the report of the chair, but in general, they're wanting more detail from us about like what exactly we're discussing. So if there aren't any questions or comments, it won't appear on your agenda, but it will be on our template to jog our memory to add things if they come up with the process that you described.
Yes, that's exactly the intention. My understanding is that the advice that has been coming out over the past few years in regards to open meeting law is that agendas do need to be quite specific. And so we shouldn't have a kind of bland agenda item that's on there every time. But if it's in the planning template and there is a question, then you already have a spot in there to plug that specific question in for the agenda.
Great, thank you. The one thing, though, that does need to change about our current process is we need to have a particular person or a particular role who is designated. So that was kind of not done exactly correctly when we were following the guidance that was given to us, but we've since learned that we really need to have a designated person or role, for example, the chair or the chair of the budget subcommittee or some specific person who will be doing the approval on behalf of the school committee. So the motion I would like to hear then, if we wanted to kind of follow the recommendation of the budget subcommittee, is a motion to designate, you could name a person or name a role to approve warrants. Mayor DeSorger?
Can I ask a question about that before?
Sure.
So I actually haven't been to one of these yet. I haven't been to one of your, the budget subcommittees. And I get those on email. You know, I get like I am sure all of you do. You get all of the on email. So do you go over them in the meetings? I know I'm supposed to ask the chair. My question is, do they go over those in meetings?
The warrants are
together.
No, the warrants are not gone over. And so we have meetings, we have warrants every 2 weeks. We don't have any committee or subcommittee that is designated to meet every 2 weeks to review the warrants together. Yeah, please.
And I'm not suggesting that we did. I just was thinking it took me a while as the mayor to figure out, because it took me for a long time to go through the warrants. It took me forever because I was making sure on each one. And this one, you know, there's things that I figured there's a lot of others who are looking at that. So it took me a while before going through them like one at a time. I feel like there's still some things that I didn't know. So I assumed that I know that the superintendent's gone through it and the business manager has gone through it, but on our end, I don't know, does anybody else do that any differently on any other? I guess I just was asking about the process and thinking about it. You've been doing this for a long time. Some of us who haven't been doing this school for a long time, there were a lot of things that popped up that I didn't know what they were. For what that's worth.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I found the superintendent and the business manager to be incredibly accessible for any questions that I've had. But I think what the budget subcommittee has done is basically put forward a procedure so that if questions aren't addressed to member satisfactions, they can be addressed at the full committee level. Member Martini?
Mayor, it sounded like you were wanting to ask what other committees do. How do other people do this? And I did do a bunch of research on that going into our recent budget and finance meetings. So as you'll recall, the Massachusetts Association of School Committees now has a database of policy manuals, and everybody who has updated their policy manuals gets to post it on there, and it's searchable. So that was a very useful function when trying to find out how other committees handle their warrant approval, and it's really all over the board. So by far, the most common approach was a single member signing. I think it's sort of odd that the advice is that there needs to be one individual, because that was definitely not the case in a lot of these other committees' policies. But in any case, and bearing in mind, there are many committees who are not on this database yet, but of the ones that are, I counted 41 that had a policy similar to ours, and it's a one-member signing policy. The next largest group was 20 who left their warrant signing process unclear in their policy manual, believe it or not. So we're apparently actually ahead on this. And then after that, the next largest group, there were like 11 that have an either-or policy, where warrants are either approved by the school committee, and it doesn't say how, or by a subcommittee of at least 3 of the members. And I would add a couple of other committees on there that specifically have a warrant subcommittee. That's their job. There were just a handful that have a majority of their school committee required to sign warrants. One of them said it was a majority of the committee or the chair's designee. There was a similar handful that was like 6 that approve their warrants at their meetings, and those are committees that meet every other week, basically. And so there's language in there that if the committee is only meeting once that month, then the Budget and Finance Subcommittee is supposed to approve the warrants. Sounds complicated to me. Then there are other committees that designate a certain person. So I found one that designates the secretary. There were 5 that designate the chair. And there was one that designates the chair of their Budget and Finance Subcommittee. A couple of school committees have their own treasurer as an officer whose job it is to approve warrants. There was one that had 3 members required to sign on a rotation, and the Budget and Finance chair gets to pick who's on the rotation and has to notify them. And I think I've covered all
That's
of
good.
the
That's
different,
good.
like I said, it's
Right.
all over the board. So,
Can I
and there were
ask
a
a
couple
question?
that it's the Budget and Finance Subcommittee. So we can do whatever we want. Basically, there's not like,
Yeah, it was
one
just
way to
Liz
do this.
LaFond, our rep at Mask, who had kind of given me the impression that we were out of compliance by only having the one-member rule, but maybe we can check with our attorney if that's actually accurate, you know?
I mean, if there's one member who wants to like raise their hand right now and say, I want this responsibility every other week, then that's great. But I just feel like that's not really fair. So that's a lot of work. So.
Member Childs?
I would also be concerned about having only one person doing it, because what happens if one week they're traveling and their laptop gets destroyed, and then what happens?
Right.
I like fail-safes.
Right, well, if it sounds like the recommendation was to kind of keep our warrant signing process as is, and why don't we do that until our attorney tells us we can't? So, does that sound good?
I would be good with that. I would like to know from folks if they like the more codified approach to questions and how to put certain questions, if necessary, on the school committee's agenda. And this is obviously something that would go into our school committee member handbook, but if members have other ideas, then please chime in.
Yeah, so we have two items basically, the warrant signing process and then this discussion of warrant questions and problems. So, but can we resolve first the warrant signing thing, because we're just on that. Is anybody object to us just leaving it the way it is until the attorneys tell us we can't? Okay, great. So now back to your proposal about the process. Anyone discussion about that? Member Goodwin?
I think my concern was that we weren't being I felt like we weren't being allowed to ask questions. And that was concerning for me, because charting the course, I mean, they made it really clear, we all are responsible when those things get signed, not just one person, every single one of us sitting here. So if we have a question about something, we should get it answered. I mean, that's really the issue. And I like the fact that the idea of it being on that template, so that if there is some question, even if you've made phone calls and you're still not sure, that you get to ask. I think what I liked is we were all asking questions and we were learning from each other, because as you ask questions about different line items, I felt like we lost that in the process, and I would like to see that back. We need to be asking more questions, I think.
Mayor DeSorker?
I just want to say for myself, I was new to this, and I'm going to kind of look at the other new members. When I first saw these warrants, I had so many questions, not like doubting anything. There were so many things that were unfamiliar to me. Like on the warrant, there would have been like 40 or 50. I know what it's like to be the mayor, and I can only imagine what it's like to be the superintendent. I wasn't calling with all of my questions because our superintendent had a school to run. That really, I didn't call with every question that I had, because they were all things that were foreign to me, the names of the schools and everything. I mean, maybe it's just me, but so am I the only person that felt like that? There's a whole list of things, and nobody else had any questions, but I didn't want to, burden anyone with all of the things that I asked, and I don't feel like we actually discussed that part. I always, when I was on council, I always had 100 questions, but there's things on that, and I thought, who signs it? I have not signed it. Have you signed it? I mean, can we ask?
I'm usually the person who signs.
I sign it often, too.
Yeah.
Okay, you
I
sign.
look through everyone and
Yeah.
sign it.
Okay,
I have signed it.
you've signed it. Okay, I've never signed it. Can we ask? Could we ask Chair? Has anybody else signed it on the other side of the room? I don't want to. We're not supposed to be talking back and forth.
No, it's fine, yeah.
I'll read them, but I defer and let the more experienced, knowledgeable people do the signing.
Okay. Yeah, Member Deneve?
I think the reason that this is coming up is because when we first got on, the three of us, there is no class on warrant signing. Like, nobody comes to talk to you about this. In fact, I think it was like day 2 after getting my email, Vera's thing pops up and is like, warrants. And I'm like, what is that? And it kept popping up, and she's like desperate to get a signature. And I'm like, well, I guess we're supposed to just do this. Like, I don't even know what it is. So we didn't have any training or discussion about it, and I can tell you that the word warrants never came up in the first 2 years of school committee. Like, it was never discussed in full committee ever once, ever about anything. So just us talking about it is like a baby step experience, so I feel like we kind of can do whatever works for us, and probably should come up with something that we all like, and that feels, as good as it possibly can for all of our schedules and time and desires, but that also leaves us the flexibility to ask the questions, because real quickly I learned, oh, we're supposed to be talking about this, but the avenue was closed until now, so we should make our path, is how I feel, however we want it, and make sure that new members that come on feel like they can ask the questions they need to ask and understand what it is, because there's really no information for us about that, and it's a big part of what we have to do, and it's a lot of pages, and like 90% of them are all pretty self-explanatory and fine. So it's just, we're talking about like tiny little things that we may have questions about. So,
And I think our dispute was not so much about whether people could ask questions. I don't know, unless there was a huge communication error. I think I've told everybody as often as I could, anytime you have a question about an invoice, feel free to ask the superintendent or business manager. Like that is, I feel like that's been a pretty consistent message for me, but I'm not sure, given the conversation, whether that really got through. I will say the superintendent and business manager have endless patience for questions from school committee members about warrants and invoices, and don't feel like you're bothering them. It is your job. You have to understand what's going on in those warrants. But I definitely concur with the idea that our school committee orientation could use a lot of beefing up, including the aspect of the kind of process for how to get questions answered about warrants and what are they and what is your role. And I really appreciate the kind of codifying of the process, that really starts with, well, maybe you can summarize again what the process was that you all came up with.
Okay. So the process is, when members have questions about warrants, please get them to the superintendent as quickly as possible, but definitely at least a week before the following school committee meeting, if you want to potentially address it at that meeting. The superintendent will take the next 4 days to do everything that she can to answer your questions. If you have something that's left over, it's not answered, or you weren't satisfied with the answer that you got, then ask the chair to put your question on the school committee agenda 3 days before the meeting. And the reason it's 3 days is so that we can meet the posting requirement for the meeting. If you have a question that falls after that timeline, still ask it. It's just potentially going to go on the next school committee agenda, because we need to be able to post things on time for our meetings so that people know what we're going to talk about.
Yep, and I would say if we can adjust the timeline just the Thursday before the meeting, then the superintendent and I meet on Friday morning and kind of get the agenda's ducks in a row. We're finding that trying to post on Monday is not workable given the bounce backs we've been getting from the city clerk's office at times. So, all right, any other discussion about warrants? Thank you, and thank you very much for taking on that project in spite of thinking maybe it should have landed with my committee, the policy committee.
I just have one other request.
Oh, yes, please.
I think this does need to be sent to the handbook subcommittee so that a new section can be created.
Okay, so let's see, motion to take the recommendation of to send the recommendation of the budget subcommittee about the approval of warrants and questions about warrants to the handbook subcommittee.
So moved.
Motion from member Childs, is there a second?
Second.
Second from member Sexton. Discussion?
the handbook subcommittee will gladly add a section, if you wish.
Thank you, member Deneve. Our living document will live on. Mayor DeSorger?
I'm going to vote in favor of that, but I want to thank Member Martini for doing all that research and looking through all of those to give to this committee. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, abstain, motion carries unanimously. Member Farber, I think I spoke kind of quickly. Did you get my motion? Okay, great, thank you. We can now move on to policy and
No, we
program.
can't.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry, discussion of, that's right. Go ahead, Member Martini.
Sorry, you can pillory me later. We have one other topic that we addressed in budget and finance, which is the feedback that we received from our recent outreach in the community about the development of the FY26 budget. So I wanted to share that feedback with you if I can find it. Here it is. Okay. This is a summary of the information that was, or suggestions, wishes, views that were offered to us by attending PTOs as well as the GHS School Council and the CPAC and the LPAC. So, boiled down into themes, the number one across the board thing that was brought up was the need to improve staffing. No surprises there. We especially need to improve our staffing of substitute teachers and IAs, as well as special education teachers. And that's something we've touched on earlier this evening. We, last year, did approve an increase in our subrate, but unfortunately we are still greatly struggling to attract adequate substitutes. And that is impacting some of the other positions for which we already have staffing issues, like IAs. If we have an IA who's being pulled to substitute because we don't have a substitute, then that individual is not able to provide what they are supposed to be providing in the classroom. And I would like to add that some of what our IAs are providing are things that our students with disabilities are legally entitled to receive. So if they don't have their IA, they may not be receiving the accommodations and services that they require in order to learn. So it's a big issue, and that was certainly the thing that was spoken to the most. And there is support in the community, of course, for maintaining small class sizes. We have the second most frequent issue that was brought up was the need to support social emotional learning and the well-being of our students in that area. So there is a lot of support for continued SEL for students and teachers, including things like anti-bullying program, access to counseling, ensuring cultural and linguistic capacity in counseling, professional development for our IAs in this area, and that aligns very much with what the superintendent shared at our last school committee meeting that was gleaned through listening sessions from last year and is definitely well understood to be a front burner issue in the district. There was also happiness expressed with our high quality instructional materials and a desire to continue to support them, as well as the need for a consistent K-5 science curriculum and instructional resources. A desire to bring foreign language instruction back to Greenfield Middle School, and a desire for additional arts and music opportunities in the district, such as bringing specials to AEL, funding for instrument repair, music non-performance electives, and vertically aligned arts extracurriculars so that we have students building skills in those areas from early on for later. There is across the board desire to have more in-school enrichment activities as well as more field trips. And those, I would say, constitute the big ones, the ones that were brought up the most frequently. There were additional things that were brought up less frequently but are still important, including tech needs, such as the Elevation platform to support our English language learners is a wish, the need for things like Prometheans and smartboards, document cameras, iPads, and laptops. There is interest in supporting our libraries and making sure that they have more books and more librarians when we're able to provide them. A desire to support developing parents' capacity for understanding their rights in special education. and a desire to support LPAC to LPAC intergroup activities. Transportation was brought up as a need for co-op sports and extracurricular activities, as well as specifically for the LPAC, in order to provide transportation for both intra and intergroup activities. And there is a wish for a volunteer coordinator or community coordinator and community resource support for parents. Those are all the things that I think are pertinent to the operating budget. There were also a number of needs brought up that would be perhaps more pertinent to capital. Sorry, Mayor. There are a number of issues that were brought up at Federal Street. The elevator, of course, is top of everyone's mind. And I would just reiterate what Member Childs said earlier about that. Also, there were issues with stair flooring and railings in need of repair, the sidewalk in front of the accessible entrance in need of repair, the brick wall in the playground, and door and window issues. And there were some additional problems like that at AEL, such as gaps in the fence and the need for play structure and cafeteria tables that are actually sized for 3 to 4 year olds. Oh, and there may be a heat issue at Four Corners because we evidently have a staff person who's not able to turn the heat down in their classroom.
Thank you for the outreach and for the report. Would you take questions and comments from the committee? Anyone?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Great. Thank you very much. To Policy and Program Subcommittee. So these are what's in your agenda as first read. Our process is basically to share it with you, provide an opportunity for discussion, and then at the next meeting to vote on policies. Any discussion of either policy JICA dress code or policy KBG parent advisory councils? Okay. We'll bring those back to you next month for the vote. If you have any questions or comments that come to you in the meantime, you can let me know as chair of the policy committee. We can try to address them before the next meeting. On to the Community Engagement Subcommittee.
We met 3-ish weeks ago now, and the two items that are before us, we were brainstorming ways that we could make meetings even just slightly more accessible to families and parents in particular. And one of the things that we discussed was actually moving our start time for these regular monthly committee meetings to 6:30 to give parents and families an opportunity, and I would also add committee members, an opportunity to have dinner or do other activities. But if they wanted to come here, it is a struggle to do all the stuff they need to do by the time they're done with work and get here by 6. Additionally, it would make us consistent with city council meetings, which I think is just a helpful, so that's one less shift that you have to keep in your brain when you're thinking about when you might want to participate in your civic activities. So that's something that we are making a recommendation and would entertain a vote on if we wanted to do that. The other was more of a discussion about committee member participation in school community activities and being a visible presence so that we can also be available when people have questions about policy or when they want to give us feedback about budgets, when it's even not budget season perhaps. And so and y'all might not like this, but we're gonna say it anyway, is to see if we can put some language in our policy manual that asks us to show up to things on a regular basis. And it's not just the community engagement subcommittee's responsibility to show up to stuff. And we're talking things like athletic games, band stuff, other community events, maybe the Comic-Con, you know, and that we, right, like, there's so much stuff that our kids are involved in and that our schools do, that if we just, one or two of us went and made ourselves available and made ourselves a visible presence, we think that that would go a long way to saying, we're wanting to be where you are, and maybe that will encourage you to come to where we are next time when you have a question or a concern or want to talk to us, as a way of sort of building additional connection and rapport. So the idea there, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on this, would be to actually add language. Now, keep in mind, we did ask, this would not be legally binding or enforceable, and we could not kick you off the committee for not doing it, but it's more of a statement of, this is an intention of how we would like to operate. This is what we would like to hold ourselves to as Greenfield School Committee members, that we want to be engaged and active and visible members of this community, and that this is sort of an expectation that people can have when they're running for the position. Although, of course, like I said, we can't enforce it, but we can make it a norm.
Thank you. So I think I heard possibility of two motions in there. The first would be a motion to change the school committee meeting start time to 6:30 p.m. Is there a motion to do that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Is there anyone for whom, if it was changed, it would make it impossible for you to attend the meeting? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, Mayor.
So that's fine with me either way, but did that come from parents or? So I'm just.
Yeah, it has previously come from some parents, but it has also come from some other committee members and their past experience.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Let's vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstain? I'm going to abstain. So the motion carries. We will change our start time to 6:30 p.m. Thank you. And then I think the other motion would be to refer incorporating the expectation of school committee members to participate in school events in our policy manual. Okay.
And also the handbook, probably, because those two things should be hand in hand.
And the handbook, okay. So maybe we would start though with the policy and then refer to the handbook for guidelines on implementation. So motion would be to refer the expectation that school committee members participate in school events into our policy manual. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Member Martini, is there a second?
Oh, second.
Okay, discussion? Member Childs?
I have a clarifying question, just because the language being vague, you're going to have some members of the community who will expect full school committee at every single school event that they go to, and then you might have school committee members in the future who think going to one or two events a year is sufficient to count. So I'm trying to figure out what the intent is and if we can make that a little clearer.
And I would welcome the support of the Policy and Program Subcommittee to put actual language to this, but the intent is not that the full committee is at every single event. That is impossible. That is flatly, that's not going to happen. But that is, we make an intention to have at least one school committee member at many. Like, I can't even put a percentage on it necessarily, because there's lots of events that we don't even know about, honestly. But that it's maybe more akin to like 3 events per committee member per semester or something like that, or per year.
So, Member Deneve?
I'm just remembering from our meeting that what we sort of said was, at the beginning of the year, or when we have a calendar of events, we'll sort of all divvy it up. And if one person has more time, great. If another person doesn't, fine. But each person should expect to attend 2 or 3 events a year. Nothing that would make it too difficult, and something that would be able to disperse it fairly evenly amongst us, depending on how thick the calendar is.
Other discussion? Member Childs?
So the other thing, I'm like thinking already like into the weeds of this, because we've got our monthly meetings at the elementary schools, and then we've got our PTO meetings everywhere. And I would hate for a situation to develop where one school has school committee representation every single month, while another school only once or twice at these routine things, if you are there as an official school committee person as opposed to a parent. And even then there's that little bit of messy overlap. Sorry, I'm just trying to pick out every possible way that this could cause us trouble in advance so that we can prevent the trouble and keep the good. Sorry, it's late.
Thank you. Member Martini?
Well, my comment relates to what Member Childs was just saying. School committee members already devote a great deal of time to the school district. We are here every month for meetings. We are responsible for things in between meetings, like everyone should be looking at the warrants. And we have subcommittee meetings to attend on a regular basis, among other things. So I'm not opposed at all to committee members attending school events, and I think that we should. But I do want to be cognizant of the fact that not everyone has the same capacity to do that, especially people who are working and parenting kids with special needs. And I wouldn't want to create an expectation that discourages people from running for a school committee or wanting to serve on it because they have constraining factors like that in their life. I think we should just give some thought to potential systemic bias that could be in a policy like that. That being said, I would happily see a norm or a statement of encouragement or something like that to do things like this in the school committee member handbook. Just my thoughts.
Thank you. Other discussion? Member Goodwin?
I totally agree. It's more of a norm than a policy, because I don't think you can make it a policy because everybody comes to this committee with different time restraints. But just even a statement that says that school committee members are welcome to attend various school, events. I think that's, because there's always this, in the back of your head, you have the conflict of interest video in your head, but I think of all the things that even when we're invited, like whether it's to the band or to different events, that we represent not just who we are, whether it's a parent or a community member, but we're also representing school committee. And I think that's why it probably belongs a lot in the handbook. That when you are in that public situation, you are still a school committee member. I'm thinking of that video with, forget the guy's name, where he was like at some game and he was being bad. So, but there, in the training, it basically says to remember as you attend those things, even though you're there for another reason, you're still a school committee member.
Thank you. Other discussion?
Is it okay if I
Member
respond
Sexton? Sure.
to some of that? Yeah. I am open to it being something that's included in the handbook. And like I said, even if we had a policy, it's not enforceable. So I understand where folks are coming from with that. I really do. That you don't always have the intention. But the real reason why the Community Engagement Subcommittee put this even forward as an idea is not to give us more work to do, just to give us more work to do, but as an actual strategy for building relationship with parents we might not see or hear from often or all the time, and to give that one more bit of like, we are reaching out to you so that maybe you might reach a little bit further back toward us, you know, because I understand we're here every month. I'm here with you, Gal, but we don't always get the engagement we might want with folks. And so maybe if we are slightly more like, yeah, we're here, we're at your games, we're at your whatever, and we're not always expecting them to come to us at our forums, that we go to them where they're at, where their kids are at, where what they really care about is at. That might just be one way that we can build more rapport and more engagement, and hopefully just have more open lines of communication. So, that's the real intent.
Member Childs?
I wholeheartedly agree with the spirit to that. I would just want us to add on some communication component among us so that we can make sure that none of the schools fall through the cracks and end up underrepresented in our outreach.
Other discussion? So I think I heard from you, Member Sexton, a willingness to amend your motion to refer to the handbook rather than the policy committee?
Correct.
And the person who seconded? Would you accept that amendment? Sure. Okay.
I think I actually moved it,
Yeah,
Oh,
you moved it.
okay.
and I will accept the friendly amendment.
Great. All right, do you accept it? Yeah? Okay. So now the motion is that, and I guess I have one, I guess I'll add a little to the discussion. I just want to really concur with what Member Martini was saying, that I'm already concerned with the extent to which being on school committee is essentially, there's a kind of a class divide in terms of who could even run and participate in this, you know, stipended position with all the number of hours involved and so on. And I really appreciate all the school committee members and the sacrifices you make and your families make to be here. And I know that for some, even running for this is just not doable given their lives. And then adding more to the expectation is concerning. But I also agree with the kind of building the culture and the kind of ethic of doing it amongst ourselves. And I think the handbook's a good place. I also would welcome the community engagement subcommittee to create tools that might be useful to us in terms of that, like if it's a Google Doc with a table with different events that are coming up and a place where people can, you know, put their name and say, I intend to go here, might be useful to us in terms of being able to see who's going to what and make sure, as Member Child who was saying, concerned about like not having one school that's left out. So I think that'd be great. But that's a big effort too. So appreciate whatever you can do to help make it even easier for us. And I certainly appreciate all the communication from the superintendent and the different building principals and the PTOs and so on to let us know what is going on, because it definitely is possible to know what is happening given the communication that we're receiving, and I appreciate that. So any other discussion? All right, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We're on to old business, and I'd like to move to take from the table the motion postponed at the November school committee meeting to create an ad hoc subcommittee to research and present a proposal on whether to set a goal of constructing a new elementary school. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So all in favor of taking that up?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so now we're returning to our original motion, which is to create an ad hoc subcommittee to research and present a proposal on whether to set a goal of constructing a new elementary school. Discussion? Mayor DeSerger?
When did this come up? What meeting was this at?
Full committee meeting last month.
Okay.
Or it was tabled pretty quickly.
So if you were thinking of that, who would you be thinking would be on it? Just people on the school committee?
Yeah, it would be a school committee subcommittee, yeah. It could also be structured as an advisory committee. Our policy allows us to have either of those formats, but the advisory committees allow for more members besides just school committee members. And I think, thank you, okay, yes. Member Goodwin and then Member Sexton.
As a principal of construction who survived, a lot of cities or towns have one building and sites group of people. You know, they're made of all kinds of different areas that look at schools in every building in the city. So I don't know if that exists, Mayor, but that's usually where it all starts, and then it brings in school committee members as part of that. But usually it starts with the city building and sites committee, and then those are usually the people who apply for the money.
Member Sexton?
If I'm reading the motion as worded correctly, we are not yet proposing to have a subcommittee actually advance doing work to get us a new elementary school. What this subcommittee would do is decide whether or not we're even bringing the goal forward. Am I reading that correctly?
They'd make a proposal to the full school committee about whether to adopt that as a goal.
Then at this time, I think that it is appropriate for it to remain a subcommittee of us to decide whether or not and do some due diligence. And then if we do in fact say, yes, that's a goal, and we create another body that achieves that goal, that makes progress towards it, at that point, I think it's time for us to bring in the other folks, the other parties.
Other discussion? Member Martini?
I think it's the responsibility of the school committee to look out for the well-being of the schools. And if we do not push the issue, then it will just continually sit as it has been sitting for a long time. And I will just briefly reiterate what I said last month. We have 3 elementary schools, all of which have problems. Our buildings are quite old. We have known issues, one of which Member Goodwin spoke to earlier this evening at Federal Street School, where what we are doing with the elevator is a fix. And my recollection from our previous superintendent's explanation was that we were given to understand it is only a fix, and there is the possibility that this thing will actually need to be replaced. And at that time, the estimated cost of that was $1 million. I'm sure that it would be more now. And a cost like that is exactly what led to the closure of Green River School and the chaos that subsequently ensued in the district, moving grade levels around, with the repercussions of which we're still dealing with and have not finished with the redistricting process we're in right now. So I would wholeheartedly support the committee doing some research on this so that we can be very forward-thinking about the needs of our schools, because this is definitely, if it is to happen, at least 10-year plan.
Other discussion? I guess one thing I want to say is I think it's I guess whoever is chairing the school committee next year will be responsible for providing the subcommittee their kind of a job description. And I just think it's important with ad hoc subcommittees that there's clarity from the beginning about when the ad hoc ends, essentially. And I think with this one, it would be when the proposal was put forward to the full committee, then the ad hoc subcommittee ends, and if a new subcommittee gets created to advance whatever goal they put forward, that's a different committee. But I just think that would be useful for the school committee's functioning to have those kind of metrics of when a subcommittee's work is done, ad hoc subcommittee's work is done. And I think, just to say that I think because the organization meeting is on Monday the 6th, and the first meeting of the year will be the 8th, whoever's elected chair at the meeting on the 6th will have a quick turnaround to do assignment of subcommittees and so on. But I wouldn't think that it would make sense to essentially staff this ad hoc subcommittee before January 8th. So, all right, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Abstention from the mayor. So motion carries. Thank you, everybody. All right, we are on to school committee year-long agenda. So I gratefully accepted the gift from Member Deneve and Member Sexton. It was a very useful starting point for our work in putting together a year-long agenda. I hope you like what I did with it. This version of it, the version I received had some specific dates for 2025. I thought this would be a good template for essentially what are the things that happen every year. And then once it's adopted for a given year, you could add in specific goals of the committee and specific timelines based on the calendar year and stuff like that. But so think of this as kind of like your standing year-long agenda, I guess. And any questions or comments? Member Goodwin?
What is YELO?
What does
It's
it stand?
Youth Engaged Legislative Officials, and it happens every year at the high school, and it's the best day ever, so you should go. Everyone should go. You get to talk to the students, and the students get to tell you what they're into and thinking about and want, and so it's a wonderful, wonderful hands-on day. I love this. I love your actions. Love it.
Oh, she
Will
loves
this
it.
be public? Will this be on the website so that the public can also see what our work timeline is?
Absolutely. If the committee adopts it, we can definitely get it out there.
Wonderful.
And I think the recommendation was to have it basically in a way that as the school committee is updating its year-long work plan, it gets a living document that gets updated on the website as well. Any other discussion? Any changes or recommendations for the year-long agenda? Member Mayor Disorder?
What is the date of that yellow? Because it's December. Do we know what the actual date is?
The superintendent's working on it.
I've been, it is fun. I've been a couple times, yeah, it's good.
Thursday, January 23rd, and then the snow date is Thursday, January 30th.
Thank you. I wanted to say one thing about it. One change that I made to the calendar was to make it a July through June calendar. because I thought if you're electing a new chair in January, it might help them to have, 6 months to be starting to work on the one for the following fiscal year, essentially. So, and they would come in with some work that's already been programmed by the previous subcommittee. So, hope that was okay. Seems like there isn't an
It's your gift.
It's
We
my-
intended
you
you
did
to.
give it to me as a gift.
Made up
and
dates,
I
so
made
it was,
my
we needed
own.
you to fix it.
All right, great, yes, Member Sexton.
For when we post this, if we post this online, can we add like a paragraph preamble that's just like, this is a template?
Sure,
Be on the lookout for actual stuff. Yeah.
abso-smurfly.
I have a question
Member Martini.
about the annual tour of schools by city officials. Am I crazy, or did this used to happen around January? And is there a reason that it's moved to August, and does that affect what otherwise would be the school tour next month?
I moved it, and I think because I remember tromping around in a heat wave, sweating like you would not believe. It definitely did not happen for me in January, but maybe it got moved to January. But what is most convenient for you, Superintendent, for that to happen?
It did happen in January last year because Christine, I think, was sick because I gave the tour. And we did it on, no, you're not crazy. So we did it on the PD day in January, but I can do one in January. We can do one in August before school starts. It's just when students aren't in the building, that way folks can, go where they want to go, see what they want to see, and not interrupt learning. So as long as it's pre-school beginning, or if it is on a PD day, it is least disruptive.
Okay, so my preference would be to have that take place closer to the capital requests, approvals. I would like city council members to be in our school buildings, seeing what's really going on with them right before they have to decide whether to approve our requests for capital. So January would be my preferred time to do that.
Great. Can we do it in 25? Great. All right. So I'll make that adjustment. So I guess maybe maybe we're ready. I wasn't sure if we would be. So a motion to approve the year-long agenda template as presented. Not as presented, with the change of the school tour from August to January.
So moved. I'm so excited.
Motion from Member Deneve. Is there a second? Second from Member Child. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? I'll abstain. Motion carries. Wonderful. Okay. I'm just going to breathe for a second. Okay. On to school committee self-evaluation data presentation. You may remember we had taken this survey for our self-evaluation, and we realized after we had taken it that it was broken. We fixed it, and then 6 of us retook it, or some number of us retook it. And these are finally at last the results of it. Thanks very much to the superintendent and for the Collaborative for Educational Services for putting together this very nice report for us. I'm gonna say I have lost bandwidth for this discussion just because of the time of the night. Would there be any objection to revisiting this next month? Okay, not hearing any problems with that. Great. So let's see, moving on, we have the MOU between the Greenfield School Committee and the Greenfield Police Department. Superintendent, will you cue this up for us?
Sure. As we have been discussing on our increased safety and security protocols and the improvements that we've been making district-wide to our systems. One of the things that we had discussed was allowing access to our live video feeds by the Greenfield Police Department in certain instances when there is a emergency situation or an active threat. The MOU was drafted and then finalized by our attorney, and you are presented with the final MOU to discuss and vote on this evening so that we can then engage with the Greenfield Police Department and get it approved and in place.
So let's see, where are my motions? Motion to approve the MOU between the Greenfield School Committee and the Greenfield Police Department as presented.
Could we have a few more minutes to look at it? I only got to look at it briefly before. Is it okay?
Absolutely, but let's get the motion and the second on the table.
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay. Great. And while you're reviewing, I'll just remind us that in our discussion of this, we can talk about the general MOU, but we just have to be thoughtful about not asking about or revealing any particular procedures or things that could potentially put the schools at risk. I think we should proceed to discussion. Member Sexton?
I have questions just to better understand the emergency alert system and like when that gets triggered, who actually does that? Because if that's the only instance where they actually don't need your permission, I want to understand exactly what conditions trigger that sort of case.
That would have to be an executive session discussion.
Okay.
Any other questions or discussion? Member Deneve?
This might be an executive session discussion one too, but I was wondering if we could get clarification on the indemnification clause, where it says the GPD agrees to indemnify and hold harmless the public school district from any liability arising from unauthorized use or access to the live video feeds. I'm just wondering what the unauthorized use exactly means. Because there should never be any unauthorized use, I guess is why I'm.
Yeah, that's a standard part of it.
It may totally be boilerplate.
It basically is saying that they're holding us harmless from any liability. So they're not going to sue us, basically? Is that what they're saying? They're not going to sue us. I don't know why they would sue us.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's why I wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly.
Yeah. But they're not going to sue us if they use or access it. You're right, that is a little bit confusing, a little bit.
That's what I was
turned
like,
around.
that's what I was trying to understand. I'm sorry. Like, that's just seemed odd.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. I don't want them to sue us, but
Yeah. I'm wondering if we should maybe, unless you have any, Superintendent, you have any clarification on that. Maybe we should make sure that that language is actually correct, because it doesn't actually, now that you brought it to my attention, Member Deneve, it doesn't totally make sense to me.
I would presume that if it was being used with an unauthorized access and there was some potential for, I think I would prefer if we have this discussion in executive session, because as I'm playing it out, there is just too many scenarios.
All right. And what's the timeline? How quickly do we need this MOU? We needed it yesterday, or?
It would be preferred, yes.
We can't because it's not on the agenda. So,
You may be called.
oh, okay. All right, let me pull up the reason for the executive session, and we'll do that.
We're doing that tonight. Oh, God, okay.
Yep. I'd like to hear a motion to enter executive session to discuss the deployment of security personnel or devices or strategies with respect thereto.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Secretary Deneve, will you call the vote?
Yeah, hold on one second. Who made the motion to enter executive session? Okay. And Kate, you seconded it, okay. Okay, all right. Deneve, I'm a yes. Vice Chair Martini?
Yes.
Mayor DeSorger?
Yes.
I'm a yes.
Member Sexton?
Yes.
Member Childs?
Yes.
Member Goodwin? Okay, we're all in agreement and are entering executive session.
And we will return to the public session, so we'll be back. Okay, welcome back. We're back from executive session. I'd like to, let's see, I think we're returning to our existing motion to approve the MOU. Any further discussion? Okay, let's vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously, minus the mayor who left when we adjourned for executive session. And then we are on to requests for future agenda items. Hearing none, I'd take a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Is there a second? Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned at 9:42 p.m. Thank you so much. Stickers for everyone.